I'm not sure if we have our.
Recording in
appointee.
progress.
How we doing?
Pam is also here, I saw.
Yes, yes, once you get something.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do not see him yet.
What's his name?
Joel Shames.
Yes, Joel Shames.
In case somebody gets out of hand.
He knew
Yeah,
within
no, I-
45.
Yes.
Okey-doke.
Yeah, what's going on here? I had, it was planned surgery. I had two of the hip joints, knuckles joints in my hand replaced with silicone joints
Wow.
from,
This bionic
yeah,
person. What
yeah.
are you doing? Like boxing
Yeah,
class?
boxing class, yeah, it was boxing. And I had
Okay.
my index finger pinned.
Who's that fellow at the top of the screen? That's not him?
You got some PT to help.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah, I got PT going on. It comes out tomorrow.
Okay. I can't, I just see it. So we'll recognize him because his name will come up and not just a phone number or something.
His name should come up.
Okay. Are we audio yet?
Yes, you are, the recording is live.
Okay, we're just, folks, we're just waiting for a fellow who is going to be appointed to the Auburndale Historic District Commission. So as soon as we see him, we will get started.
Well, we could table it until he would come back.
It sure
Yes,
is.
it is.
On it.
This is the gentleman really.
Yeah. There we go.
Oh, excellent.
Want to go somewhere in particular?
Anywhere you like at the table.
Yeah, sure.
Watch.
Somebody's at the last seat. If you want to.
Great.
Sit right here.
No.
Thanks.
This one.
This one?
Yes.
That's fine. Yep, thank you for coming. Okay, let me begin the meeting officially. Welcome, everyone. This is a regularly scheduled meeting of the Zoning and Planning Committee on Monday, April 24th, 2023. I'm Deb Crossley, Chair of the committee, and Councilor at Large from Ward 5. To my left is Councilor Victoria Danberg, at large from Ward 6. And then President and Councilor Susan Albright from at large from Ward 2. And to my right is Allison Leary at large from Councilor at large from Ward 1. At the table tonight, but not back in the room, also is Councilor Pam Wright at large from Ward 3. And at the table also is our planning director, Barney Heath. Online, I don't see any other.
Councilor Krinsman is
Oh,
here.
oh, good. Okay. Councilor Krinsman is joining us online. There you are. Thank you. And as well, we have two planning staff joining us from online, Zachary Lamel and Jen Kyra. Unfortunately, both of them have illness in their families right now, so they are nicely deciding not to expose us to themselves, but they will be giving our presentation later this evening. We are also joined at the beginning of the meeting by Councilor Alicia Bowman. And I don't believe I see any other counselors, but I will introduce the Planning and Development Board if they're here yet. If the chair, I don't see the chair.
I see Kevin McCormick, but I don't see the chair yet,
Okay, you know
but he
what?
may not be joining until 7.
I'll wait until 7 for
Yeah.
that. So the reason we started at 6:45, other than the fact we have a long agenda, is that we have an appointment who's joining us at the table, Mr. Joel Shames of 348 Central Street in Auburndale. And her honor, the mayor is asking to appoint him as a full member of the Auburndale Historic District Commission for a term of office to expire on March 20th, 2026. This is item 73-23. And Mr. Shames, welcome. As you know, I think you were an alternate.
Yes.
Previously, ask if you'd like to just, in this case, say how's it gone on the Historic Commission and why do you want to continue to serve?
It's gone fine. We've had our share of issues that are fairly mundane and routine, and then of course we're also been dealing with our village, so which is not a routine matter. So I'm it's been an education, and I feel yeah, it's just certain that privilege that I have the opportunity to be involved in the community in which I've resided since 1992. So I feel
Perfect.
that
But your resume has really not anything on it related to historic preservation, so this was an interest of yours as I.
Yes, I am the president of the Auburndale Neighborhood Association.
Mhm.
I was certainly involved way back when the historic district was first rejected as an idea for our neighborhood. And I was asked to become a member. The board, the commission was short of members. And I said, okay, I'll do it. And so far, it's been, a good experience overall. Some long nights.
Yeah.
as Many of you know, from attending meetings in the evening.
Many.
And as I said, it's something I'm learning from the architects on the committee and also the people who have a longer tenure on the commission than I've had.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, and thanks for coming in person. It's always nice
Sure.
to see folks in person.
Sure.
Are there any questions or from the committee? Or comments?
Your ward 4.
Yeah, no, I was just gonna say.
Go ahead.
If I may, just to thank you.
Sure.
And as you said, there's many long nights.
Yeah.
And lots of stuff to learn and study and
Yeah.
vote on. So thank you very much for being willing to do this.
Sure, I'm not patting myself on the back, but I think a lot of the general governance or norms come from citizens being willing to participate. Democracy is not to sound too highfalutin, democracy is not just voting, it's also participating.
It's very messy, isn't
It is, there's times when maybe you say, gee, it's not, sometimes autocracy looks pretty good. You've been at a meeting till 10 o'clock at night.
Well, I'm seeing that Councilor Krinsman, Councilor at Large from Ward 4 has his hand raised. Councilor Krinsman.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Want to say that I wholeheartedly endorse this nomination. I had the pleasure of working with Mr. Shames on the Riverside Station Neighborhood Coalition, which he did not mention, but he was an integral member of our steering committee in that effort. And I want to say that he always brought a very rational and practical voice to all of our discussions. So I think he would be a fantastic addition to the Auburndale Historic Commission, and therefore I'd like to move approval.
Thank you. A good quality to have on any committee.
Zoning and plan.
Sorry, this is zoning and planning.
Zoning and planning.
Okay. Well,
Have a seat.
thank you, folks. We have a motion on the table to approve Joel Shane's nomination. All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Any opposed or abstentions? That is unanimous.
Great,
So welcome.
thank you.
You may join us for the rest of the evening, but we will ask you not to be at the table.
Yeah, listen,
As we discuss
You
so.
don't mind if I go?
No, we don't. It was a test.
Yeah. I think I need to, eventually we'll have to go down to City Hall and
Yes.
and sign
Yes.
back in,
Yeah.
and probably get sworn in again.
Uh,
That's probably the next step after.
After the full, this goes to the full council.
Okay.
Their next, our next meeting, which is Monday,
Okay.
so after that.
Okay, do I need to show up for that meeting here?
No, no.
Okay.
You
Unless
don't-
you like to stay after 10 o'clock at night.
Yeah, some other nights. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you for serving. It's nice to meet you in person. Okay, folks, so we have 2 items before us this evening. Our second item is the main item, and I expect we will be spending a couple of hours discussing it. But first, we need to wait 5 minutes, but maybe we should close the door.
Yes,
Thank you. Because we can't hear. Are there enough members of the planning board to introduce yourselves yet? I see Peter Doringer. I see Kevin McCormick. I still don't see. I see, oh, no, So
Jennifer Linsky here.
Jennifer
Deb
Mullins.
Malinsky.
Okay, who's the vice chair of the planning board? Is the vice chair here?
Kevin McCormick.
Yes, I am, Madam Chair.
Wonderful. Kevin, would you please introduce the members of the committee who are here so far?
It's Peter Doringer is here and Jennifer Malinsky. And that's all I see right now.
Okay, and ex officio Barney Heath
Yep.
is
So we
here.
have-
So you have a quorum.
Yes.
Okay, when Kelly Brown comes in, we will introduce him if I can catch his arrival. I think actually we have to wait for 2.5 minutes till the clock hits 7 before I can officially begin the public hearing. I could meanwhile, however, introduce that we have our sustainability team here in the persons of Leora Silks, who is going to lead this presentation. And I believe Ann Berwick is joining us imminently. And I also see that from the law department, we have Andrew Lee, who's been working on this first item as well. And we have just been joined at the table by Sir Lyle Baker.
My apologies.
No worries. You just missed meeting Joel Shames in person, although you may have already. Um,
Successfully.
yes,
Yeah.
it was unanimous. You just didn't get to vote. So we are all here and waiting for the clock to tick 7. I think you can open all those fans now if we think we're gonna.
Yeah.
Because they're loud.
They're loud, yes, that's right. No one violated.
For a couple of them.
Leave that one.
Oh,
While we are waiting, am I allowed to test that my microphone is working?
yes, please. It sounds good to us.
Excellent. I'd had some audio issues earlier this morning.
Good. That sounds perfect.
Lee Breckenridge from the planning board also joins.
Okay, I'm informed that Lee Breckenridge from the planning board has also joined as we're waiting for the clock. We have 1 minute. And Director Berwick said that she's also joining us from 7 to 8.
It's not.
It's now 7. Excellent. That's because we have to follow the rules of the public notice. The item is 227-22. And this is Councilor Crossley on behalf of the Climate and Sustainability Team requesting a discussion with all and to amend the zoning ordinance, which is section 5.13, particularly 5.13.4.d, which is a reserved section to regulate embodied carbon in large new construction. This is to further the objectives of the city's climate action plan. So as I mentioned earlier, Leora Silks will be giving us a very brief presentation. The committee has already heard this, but so to put everything in context for those who are listening tonight, she will share the essence of what's on the table before us. And then this is a public hearing. So if there are no questions for clarification from members of the council or and the committee in particular, we'll go right to the public hearing and have our discussion afterward. So Ms. Silks, are you ready?
Thank you, Councilor Crossley. I am ready and I will, could someone allow me to share my screen?
Yes, and are there people who have been advising you that you would like to introduce?
Yes, I will be talking about this throughout the presentation, but in addition to members of the planning department, the climate team, and the law department from a city perspective of having, and city councilors as well, having looked through this already, we have a group of residents with industry experience, who I'll introduce in the presentation, but I believe Mark Webster is on this call. He's a structural engineer. And I don't know if the other members of our embodied carbon working group are going to make it tonight. But Mark Webster is here.
Great. Thank you. Are you able to share your screen yet?
It should have just been.
There we go.
Okay, so yeah, as mentioned, well, first of all, thank you, Councillor Crossley, and to the entire Zoning and Planning Committee for giving us time on your busy schedule to talk about embodied carbon. I will give a brief overview. This is the same presentation that had been given about a month ago to a much smaller council meeting, but want to make sure that everyone who is here today is coming here with the same information and background to have a good discussion. So first an introduction about what embodied carbon is and why we care about it, and then getting to the details of what exactly would we be adding to our ordinance. We'll start though, all we are talking about is the sustainable development requirements that apply to special permit projects over 20,000 square feet. So we'll get to the details, and we're asking for an analysis for them. So it's I'm going to introduce the concept at large, but at the end of the day, it's going to come down to just large projects getting a special permit. And the core piece of what we're looking to add to our ordinance is about an analysis, not more than that. So what is embodied carbon? Embodied carbon refers to the carbon emissions associated with the entire life cycle of any item. In our case, we're talking about buildings. And so we're talking about building materials, the extraction, manufacturing, construction, life cycle, or through the use of the item to repair, demolition, disposal, recycling, etc. Right? This is in contrast to when we're talking about buildings, the operational carbon piece being the electricity and other fuel use in the building. Why do we care about this so much? Because this is a significant portion of the total emissions from any building. And as we work to make our buildings higher performance, as is done through a lot of other conversations that are happening at the city and state level with our building codes, as our buildings become more operationally efficient, the materials used to make the building take up a larger portion of the total emissions of the building. And all of those upfront emissions are created and into the world as soon as the building is created. So if we are looking to meet our goals over the next 10, 20 years, our climate goals at a city, state, federal, etc., world level, we have to think about not just the entire life cycle of the building, but about what are we doing today that might boost or not boost quite as much the emissions that we're putting out in the short term as we're trying to drastically reduce total emissions. There are a lot of tools available for addressing or for analyzing embodied carbon to understand what is going on in your building and ways that you can address different materials or different ways of reducing embodied carbon. These tools are available through a variety of programs. Some of them are free, some of them cost some money, but there are multiple ways to do analysis. There are also multiple ways for those who would like to address embodied carbon and change the amount of embodied carbon in a building. This can be essentially broken down into design strategies about the shape or the format of the building, and procurement strategies about the specific cement mix or steel or wood that you are using in the building. Locally, there are other cities and towns that are looking to address embodied carbon. Town of Brookline has adopted about a year ago a regulation to use low carbon concrete in town-owned projects. So these are both buildings and things such as sidewalks. And Cambridge and Boston are also working on things fairly similar to what we were doing in Newton about looking at large buildings in their initial building phase. Both the initial analysis piece and then Cambridge and Boston are starting to draft out what that could look like perhaps years down the road to include reduction as well. Cambridge, just in the last month or two, has passed their ordinance language stating that analysis will be required for their large permitted projects, but they are still working on the details of what that the regulations that will go with that ordinance will end up looking like. There are also a variety of bills introduced at the state level to address embodied carbon, and plenty of things happening in other jurisdictions across the country. In Newton, we have initially started thinking about this a few years ago. In 2019, as we were putting together our first climate action plan, there was mention of embodied carbon, but mentioned that it is something that is not being specifically addressed and should be addressed at a later point. And in our sustainable development design section of the zoning ordinance, also from 2019, there was a section created to address embodied carbon, but all that is written is the word reserved, as at the time there wasn't consensus on what would be the best way to actually address this topic. Then over the 2 or so years later, in fall of 2021, a few members of residents of Newton with industry experience started gathering, Mark Webster, Russell Feldman, and Beverly Craig, and we started discussing what could happen now that we had a little bit more information, that the world had changed a little bit since 2019, and we could start thinking about filling in this reserved section. Over the last year, we've presented at the Zoning and Planning Committee, as well as talked with the EDC, Chamber Real Estate Group, Planning Board, and had some individual conversations with developers as well, to figure out what this could look like in reality and get feedback from stakeholders. So that brings us to where we are today. About a month ago, I gave the same presentation to the Zoning and Planning Committee. There was a movement to move this to a public hearing, so that is where we are now. So what is the actual language that we are introducing? As I had said at the beginning, one, this is only applicable to special permit projects over 20,000 square feet that are already subject to other sustainable development design requirements. So it's fitting into that existing section, filling in that 5.13.4D reserved section. So we're asking for an analysis of the embodied carbon for the project. For projects between 20,000 square feet and 50,000 square feet, we're asking for a limited analysis of just the structural materials, and use environmental product declarations or life cycle analysis tools. For projects over 50,000 square feet, we're asking for a whole building life cycle assessment, which is a little bit of a larger undertaking. And we're saying that you can use a number of different existing programs that outline the ways in which to conduct this assessment. And if there are other ones that come about, we'll have a way to take that into consideration. And finally, we're saying that projects that have at least 50% of floor area comprised of reuse of pre-existing structure would not have to go through this analysis process, because by reusing an existing structure, we know that you're reducing the amount of embodied carbon as you're not extracting and constructing from new materials. What does this look like in practice? At the special permit stage, we would ask, as part of the existing sustainability narrative that must be submitted, for a statement about embodied carbon, specifying which procedure of all of the options that I have listed on that previous slide to be included, so that we know that this is something that they are committing to, project team is committing to. And then at the building permit stage, asking that the analysis be done before the building permit stage, and that so that the analysis itself is presented, as well as an affidavit a registered design professional. And at this point, there's a slight difference from the full language that was submitted in the Friday packet for today's meeting. A suggested change after discussion with developers over the last week, that the affidavit could be coming from the registered design professional or a green building professional, confirming that we're meeting the requirements of section 5.13.4D. This language is also just a slight cleanup of what had been proposed in the draft that you have in front of you. So the full draft is included in the meeting materials that were shared on Friday. I have them up if it's useful to share that as part of this hearing today, as well as FAQs about a variety, explaining some of the terms in more detail, discussing costs and impacts of doing this sort of work. So thank you very much for listening, and I will turn it back to the council.
Thank you, Ms. Selks. If folks have questions that pertain to what's in the FAQ, I expect you can simply answer it. And I do see, as you mentioned, you have one of your advisors here, Mark Webster, the structural engineer, who, if folks have technical questions, perhaps you can call on him for us. If there are any, except for questions for clarification, I would like to pretty soon open up the public hearing on this, but I see Councilor Wright.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So, which we're going to talk about later is going to build by right. And so in the VC3, you could have a building between 70,000 square feet up to about 113,000 square feet, and that's by right. So none of this would pertain to it because it's only by special permit.
As Leora said at the beginning, this whole section of the ordinance only pertains to projects seeking special permits. So section 5.13 has numerous environmental controls in it and standards in it. And this was just one piece of that we put in as reserve because a few years back, we felt we didn't have enough information. It was the whole subject area was too new in the industry, but it's not as new anymore. So yes, but we did ask a question of the law department last time that does not pertain to this particular hearing, which is, may we regulate by right construction in requiring analysis? We know that we may not regulate it by trying to supersede the mass building code, but it may be possible for us to require analyses, but that is not the subject before us tonight. It's only for special permits.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. Any other questions before I open the public hearing? Seeing none, let's say the public hearing is open. Anyone online, please raise your electronic hand if you would like to speak, either make a comment or ask a question about this. And I believe there's at least one person in the room who's here for this item who might like to speak. Let's see here. I don't see any hands up on online. So Mr. Kent Gonzalez, I know you are here for this item.
Yes, I'm Kent Gonzalez with Northland Investment Corporation, also representing the chamber tonight. Just have some tweaks, some language tweaks. Totally appreciate the analysis and the presentation of a report. Makes sense. It's not a problem. It's just there's some language that may not be consistent with that. It's included in the ordinance, the red line ordinance that I have a copy of. And I have spoken with Leora about this, and it may already be being taken care of or open for consideration, but really I think it's on, let's see, go to section 513.4
D.
And under number 2, just before you get to the breakdown of the systems or methodologies that could be used, there's a requirement It states to provide justification for the building materials and systems chosen. And maybe explanation would be better. Justification gets into a why, and that why can be very different at different times. And if this is just a report on how your building is performing from an embodied carbon perspective, then I don't know why you need to justify.
Where do you see the word justification?
Item 2,
Item 2, projects over 50,000 square feet.
go down 1, 2, 3, 4 lines.
Provide justification for the following. Okay.
Explanation might be a better, more operative term there.
Ms. Silks, can you comment on this, and have you discussed this with other members of the team? I've been privy to some of your discussions, but not all of them, certainly.
I mean, at the end of the day, right, we are asking for analysis, and what we are doing with this information based on the way that we have structured this piece is taking in the reports and having that information. You know, as more of these projects go through the process, we can take a look at in what different projects have used. Is everyone using very similar strategies? Have people found different ways of addressing embodied carbon, or different materials that they're using for various other reasons in their work? So we, you know, it's not like other sorts of changes to buildings where we would ask you to, you know, you wouldn't, we are not requiring what you actually go through with. We are just asking for your explanation of what you have chosen.
Sorry, Ms. Silks, I think you might be missing the point of the question. I think that Mr. Gonzalez is suggesting that instead of using the word justification, you ask for an explanation. Because if somebody's using any one of these vetted analysis tools, then they're going to learn something from that, and they're going to explain what they've learned, as opposed to having to justify their choices. Is there any problem with using the word explain?
I think it's an explanation of why you are using, which I think would be fair. You know, sure, if we want to change the word to explanation, but not an explanation of the building materials.
Understand.
I don't need to know, you know, a full long page report of explaining what steel is, for example, right? That's not what we're looking for.
It says that explain why what was chosen. Explain, that's all.
Explain why. That makes sense to me. I
Then
don't know if Mark Webster would want to comment on this as a member of the Embodied Carbon Working Group.
Sure. Yeah, I think it makes sense. I was thinking something along the same lines, explanation of the choice of materials, you know, something along those lines. Be fine.
Is beyond what the report will generate. The report, as you know, Mark, will just generate, this is what you have, this is what you're doing, this is what you're getting. So the explanation would be an adjunct to that report, typically, in my experience.
Yeah, I mean, there may be the right materials for the project that, you know, may not even be influenced by what the study shows, or they may be, in which case that could be possibly explained if so desired. So yeah, I think that's a fine change.
Okay, perfect. And the other comment, there are some other comments, I guess, there seem to be, if the red line is everything that's being considered tonight, there are some things that the red line addresses that really aren't specific to embodied carbon. And I don't know if that's open for conversation. Let me go to the other embodied carbon comment.
Okay,
It's okay,
please.
Madam Chair. So under section 513.6. B. Confusing here. It's actually, I'm sorry, 513.6, number 3. It's the last sentence. That is part of the as part of the building permit requirement, that the embodied carbon analysis is required, an affidavit signed by a registered design professional, or I'd like to add green building professional also, confirming the embodied carbon analysis. I guess here I would just say it was performed as committed to, whereas here it has the terminology follows the requirements committed to in the special permit submittal documents. So I guess here, if requirement really only is regarding the form or the type of report that you selected, I think that's fine. But here is just sort of vague, and requirements, in my experience, would open up to somebody trying to require thresholds be discussed at some point during the process. And I know that's not the intent, but here it seems like it'd just be cleaned up to state that you're submitting the report that you said that you would submit. And comply with the requirements of that report, perhaps, or that process.
Mr. Gonzalez, could you please, for the committee one more time, or at least for me, tell us exactly where you are?
Yes, sorry. Section
5.13.6.
5.1.3, yes, number 3. It's the
Under
very-
B.
Under B.
Under B.
Oh,
Okay.
Sorry, B, sorry,
yeah, it's okay.
be confused, especially with all my scribbles.
So B, capital B3.
Yes, sorry, I apologize. Yes, the last sentence in that section, which is really sort of the crux. This is your requiring you to submit that report that you committed to.
Right, so I did see some chatter among the advisory team and Leora this week, today. And I think a little bit last week too, with no problem with changing this to, what is it, green building design professional. Can Mark, or you're still on the screen, or Leora comment on that? On where you
Yes,
are?
so that is what I had presented in the slide just now. I didn't call it out as neatly as you did, this 5.13.6B. But the end line of just saying requirements of 5.13.4D, just that direct reference up to the section above. And then adding in, registered design professional or green building professional as an option, to leave it open to whoever has the experience on the team. One piece of discussion because yes, we had this conversation last week. I'm glad that we got a chance to talk. And one discussion that when I then brought this to our working group was about, how do we make sure that this is part of the discussion between all of the relevant parties on the project team. We're not saying you have to actually follow through on what this analysis is saying, but leaving the discussion open, right? If it's happening, if the green building professional completes the report, and then it doesn't just get shelved, or just making sure that actually gets to the architect for them to review at least. Doesn't necessarily have to be in language. I think the language is all set of registered design professional and green building professional. We can add that in. But wanting, our intention is that this is something that is helpful for all members of the project team.
There was another piece of this particular sentence that I heard some discussion about, but I haven't heard you bring it up yet. Are you planning? There's a phrase in here that seems to me could be excised, which is, yeah, so you're saying embodied carbon analysis as required by this section and affidavit signed by one of these professionals confirming the embodied carbon analysis follows the requirements herein.
Yeah, and cut it right there. It follows the requirements of section 5.13.4D.
Yeah,
Thank you.
yeah,
Okay.
that's exactly what I was.
Right, because we as the city council, as legislators, don't need to be trying in any way to perfect what these tools are, right? So as long as the analysis is following the requirements of one of the types of tools listed, and you're getting the analysis that is specified here, it's done. That's a rhetorical statement. So is that correct, Leora?
Yes.
So you're
Yes.
period at the end of requirements
Yes.
of section such and such.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you. Mr. Gonzalez, do you have more?
Yeah, and again, as you know, as we talked, Councilor Crossley there, and I've talked to Leora about this, or other sort of complications to this, but just focusing on some of the other red items in here, under section 513(6)A, the special permit submittal requirements. If you go down to the narrative, number 3, A3. It starts to modify this section, but it's not dealing with embodied carbon here. And if these items are open for conversation, I'd love to bring up some thoughts there as well.
So the modifications in this section are mostly grammatical, of changing it from a long list to a bulleted list. And then the additions are 3D and E, which is specified commitment to electric vehicle charging infrastructure, which is still a requirement. We just hadn't previously listed that should be included as part of the narrative. Most teams were doing this, but it's good to have it in writing. And then E, this direct reference to embodied carbon. So those are the additions. The other pieces here are really more grammatical than content-based, and I will leave it to Councilor Crossley and the planning committee of what is up for discussion tonight.
Right now, you are on 5.13.6. A3, and then A through E. Correct? So instead of having a narrative list of items, you have simply changed this to an ABCDE list of items. That's how I read it. Is that correct? Okay, so the content of these items is not part of our public hearing for tonight. But I'm sure that the sustainability team and the working group would love to hear further from you.
About a lot of this, because, you know, for instance, D is specifically covered, and many of the items in here are covered by the new stretch code. And a lot of the items in here are not necessary anymore, but that's for another conversation.
And I'll just to satisfy your interest, I guess, the sustainability team and planning, we've been talking about the fact that we need to now that we've adopted, we are a stretch code community, we need to update section 5.13 in whole to make sure we are completely aligned and not repetitive in any way.
I would be happy to help with that, since we're embroiled in that process, doing
Did you
it,
hear that?
not writing
Ms.
about it, we're
Silks.
actually doing this and, you know, making sure our buildings are complying with the stretch code, and, you know,
Yeah.
you're looking at this, so happy to provide whatever assistance I can
Thank you,
provide.
thank you for that. That will be up to Ms. Silks, that she gets to choose her advisory committee.
And I don't cause trouble, I try to be helpful.
Thank you. We'll be in touch.
Can we make these changes if they're not part of the public hearing? I mean,
Yes, well, let me ask Law, but you know, the docket item, I think, gives us some latitude here. These are not hugely substantive changes, but I know that Andrew Lee is here, and I see a hand up too, but Andrew Lee?
Yes, Madam Chair, I had my hand up, but you answered the question. You answered the question succinctly, which is these changes are only in terms of form, not in substance at all. So the idea of substance being up for public comment and debate really isn't on the table here. In terms of form and format, I suppose it is, but you know, that's up for the commission to decide if they'd like to discuss that further.
Okay, thank you very much. Am I missing any other hands? I see Jen Malinsky of the Planning Board.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I love this direction that we're going in, and I don't have any language issues or anything like that. I'm just really curious about how the reports will be used in the special permit process. And I wondered, Ms. Silks, if you could say a little bit more about that. I mean, I know that, you know, lead analysis gives sort of it's an easy to understand kind of silver, gold, platinum, kind of something to respond to, something that directs action. And I'm just curious if that's the case with the kind of analysis you're talking about. I mean, will we, broadly, we as a city know what to do with these reports once we get them, how to, suggest improving a project or really what to do?
I have some thoughts, but I'm gonna let Ms. Silks take a shot at that first.
I look forward to hearing your thoughts, but in short, from a project process standpoint, the requirement as suggested through this draft language is, we are asking for a submittal. We are checking a box that there has been a submittal and the project is moving forward. What we can do with that analysis is certainly have a conversation with the project team if they're willing to talk through, what did they find? Is this impacting? How might this be impacting? Right. So, it opens room for having a conversation if the project team would be interested in doing that, either with the city or just amongst themselves, right? That's kind of the goal of just bringing this to discussion. And then what we can do as a city is we will now have quite a number of these, over time as more projects go through this process, and can look and see what is actually happening. What is the impact? Are we seeing projects that do this actually make changes or not? What is the total building material impact of these projects as they're going through? It's not outlined and certainly wouldn't be part of ordinance requirements, but a goal of our climate team working with folks like the Embodied Carbon Working Group is to put together guidelines and we don't have a single model of what the analysis report is required to look like, but we would like to put together a suggested gold star version that projects can look at and see an easy format for producing their report. And then if projects are using very similar ways of sharing the information, that makes it easier on our end to do analysis of it.
So I'll just add to that. I think, we've done this in the special permit process for many years now, where we've asked for certain things concretely. Here's what you must do, and it's always a negotiation. Here's what you must do in order to get the special permit, and there's an agreement that goes into the council order. But some years back on environmental issues, we started putting in, and here's a second list of things we'd like you to consider and share the information with us. And that has dramatically increased our knowledge of, how far can we go? Where should we go? And I think it's also done a lot to inform many of the builders and developers that we've worked with. And, I think in the special permit process, we've been achieving quite a lot. So to me, the educational process that this triggers it is very useful. So that's my 2 cents. I see we have, so the public hearing is still open. Simon French, are you contacting us from Ireland with it?
I am right now, yes.
It's quite late there. What would you like to say?
Almost 1 o'clock. It's just a quick question. Will this ordinance apply to 40B projects? And if not, should it?
Will it apply to what, did you say?
40B.
No, special permit projects only for the time being. This is only to do analyses and submit a report on the analysis. It's a very, very new it's years old, which is extremely new in the building industry. So a lot of people are learning a great deal right now.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. Councilor Bowman.
Thank you. I will just add on, thank you very much, Madam Chair. I'll just add on to your comments to say that, as someone on land use, we have many projects where people have come in and taken the sustainability elements that are out there that are more suggested, like 100% electrification and others, and really have started to shape their projects about wanting to meet these goals and show progress that they're doing more than the minimum, because of course they are asking under a special permit process, are asking for relief of certain items. So it definitely, I feel like has changed the conversation. So I expect this, as people become more comfortable and understanding about what their options are to reduce embodied carbon, will, start to seek opportunities to not only produce the report as required, but to seek opportunities to reduce their embodied carbon and be able to use that as a plus for a particular project. So I'm very excited to see this move forward. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Lee Breckenridge from the Planning Board.
So this is just a clarification question following up, I guess, on the 40B question, which is that MBTA communities, which won't involve, I guess, special permits, everything will be zoned of right. Those projects too, even if they're quite large housing developments, would not fall within this particular endeavor.
Correct. Right now, we're only requiring we're only dealing with the special permit section. There's a particular section in the zoning ordinance 5.13 which is only directed toward, and there's a lot of other information in there too about EV charging and so forth. And we do have, I think we said earlier in the meeting, we do have a question into the law department about whether or not we can require reporting from by right projects. So we're going to be looking into that, but it's a totally separate, would be a totally separate ordinance. Director Heath?
Yeah, I was gonna say the same thing, which is I don't think it's a done deal that this can apply to by right projects. We're looking into that particular issue.
Okay, thank you so much. All set? Ms. Breckenridge? Oh, you're on mute, but it looks like you're not.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. I don't see any other hands up. Any other, Councilor Leary?
Thank you very much for the presentation. This is really, I'm really glad we're moving this direction, and I hope that I gather that this is sort of like almost a pilot, and that we might see this expanded into more buildings as we go along. Possibly learn more. I was wondering about the low carbon concrete. Is this the same quality concrete? Does it have the same wide range of uses? Is the cost any different? And are there any limits on its uses? And can the city start using it now, on our sidewalks and things?
So I think the committee has discussed these things. It's not part of what's before us, but Leora, would you want to call on I know Mr. Webster is a structural engineer, and he is well down the road in requiring embodied carbon metrics to lower, for example, the embodied carbon in concrete. Would you like to say a few words?
Yeah, I'll turn it to Mark and he'll say it better than I can.
Thank you. Yes, it's pretty well established that we can make great concrete that has lower embodied carbon than sort of the normal run-of-the-mill concrete that we get delivered to most projects. There are many ways that the concrete can be modified with widely available materials to reduce the embodied carbon of it. In most of the concrete properties are actually improved by adding these additional materials. The only one that if you add a lot of it, you may have a little slower strength gain of the concrete, but once it does gain the strength, it's generally better than what you would have if you had not used those additives. So yes, it's very well established. We've been using this type of concrete in the structural world for many, many years. And costs, does vary because, some of the materials that go into it are industrial byproducts, which vary in, on the market in terms of availability and cost. So, you know, the cost goes up and down. Sometimes it's less expensive, sometimes it's more expensive. Often it's a wash. For many years, ready mix concrete producers have been adding some of this material without even being asked to, just because it was cheaper than the cement that they were using to replace it. So yeah, we've got the technical knowledge, and we should definitely, and I know we are. I know in our city buildings, we're already working on lowering the embodied carbon of the concrete we're using. And my hope is, for instance, that with this zoning language, that perhaps the project teams, once they see how much the concrete contributes to the embodied carbon of their projects through this analysis, they may also decide to look, oh, here's an easy thing we can do to actually reduce it, even if we don't have to, because it's low or no cost, and, you know, makes for a greener, better performing building.
Thank you. Thank you. President Albright.
I was just wondering about the role of the land use committee. So will they, is it just a check off? Yes, they've submitted it for the land use committee. Or can they say, well, we looked at your analysis and we're wondering if you could reduce your embodied carbon even further? Are they allowed to do that?
Well, I'm gonna go to Director Heath, but the land use committee is not gonna get the report. The planning department's gonna get the report. It's a requirement, just like there are other requirements to complete other kinds of
So
analyses.
just
And
for them, it's just a check off. Yes, they've submitted it
yes, for the land use committee.
for the land use committee.
Yes, it's just part of the ordinance and they must do it. Director Heath, you want to
Yeah,
add to that?
basically the distinction is it comes at the time of building permit.
After the special
Correct.
permit.
So it's a requirement that they have to submit to us. And
Okay.
we'll review, and it's part of the check off that they would get before they get their building permit.
Oh, okay, so it's after they get their permit, but before they get the building permit.
Correct.
Got it. Thank you.
Thanks, Councilor Danbury.
Okay, just one more question on that topic. Do we have we determined the process in the planning department of how this is going to happen? Who will be doing the examining of the paperwork that comes in? Do we know how that's gonna happen?
So I'm gonna let Leora answer that first, and then I'll add to what she's gonna say.
So what we are asking for is, and you know, it really is from a requirement perspective, just a check off. So whether that is directly within inspectional services or planning, or goes to, you know, climate team, perhaps me, it, you know, could be covered by a number of folks in terms of seeing that there's an affidavit that is there, and seeing that there's an analysis. And then if there is interest in further, you know, that is why we're asking for the affidavit of saying that the team itself has reviewed the actual materials within the analysis. And then, you know, as I had mentioned earlier, right, if there's interest in delving into the details as a team, the climate team would certainly want to be involved in that, and anyone else who may be interested.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Okay, it is 7:45 and I'm not seeing any more hands. I think I need a motion to close the public hearing.
Motion to close the public hearing.
Thank you. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed or abstentions? Seeing none, we have closed the public hearing. Yes,
Madam Chair, can we get a similar motion from the planning board just for?
okay, I do want to also vote, I believe, but yes, would the planning board like to close their public hearing?
Yes, could I have a motion to close the public hearing from the planning board?
So moved.
All in favor of closing the public hearing?
Aye.
Any opposed?
Okay,
All right, it's closed.
so
I
much.
believe that's 5, Barney. Amy Dean is here also.
Thank you.
Welcome, Amy. And so Councillor Princeton, I see you have your hand up.
I just want to make a purely a drafting comment, if I could. In section 5136A5, The affidavit. So my suggestion is in 3 places. So the first one is 5136A5 affidavit, and affidavit signed by the green building professional. Are you
Yep,
with me?
yep.
Rather than using pronouns there, I understand the thrust of the change there. I think as a drafting matter, it's better to just say an affidavit signed by the green building professional stating that the green building professional has reviewed.
Oh, I love that. I actually, I had a similar issue with Ms. Silks and I disagreed on the
The pronoun.
use of pronouns, yes, but never
Yeah.
mind.
So it just, yeah, it gets problematic to try to use pronouns. In a similar instance, a little further down in C3, there are 2 instances. And I would again just go with the title, stating that the professional has reviewed all relevant documents and that to the best of the professional's knowledge.
Okay, so let me see if I got this right. 5 affidavit, an affidavit signed by the green building professional stating that all relevant documents have been reviewed. Can we do it that way? Oh, no, because then you still need there. You want to say that again?
In 5136A5, the affidavit one,
Yep,
I would say an affidavit signed by the green building professional stating that the green building professional has reviewed.
okay.
And that to the best of is another there.
And that to the best of the professional's knowledge,
Best of,
or the green building professional's knowledge, whichever you want to use.
Ms. Silks, is that okay with you?
Wonderful. I was looking to model this on what had been used elsewhere in the zoning ordinance, and there weren't other uses of his, hers.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Great, and I'm sorry, Mr. Fritzman, did you say you had one more?
Yep, 5136C. So just a little further down in C3, there are 2 suggested changes today. And again, I would change those to just the professional.
Okay,
I guess the second would be the professional's
okay,
knowledge.
okay.
I'm happy to move approval. Assuming that we make those critical drafting changes, then I would move approval.
did we take a vote on closing?
Yes, we did. Yes. So we now have a motion to adopt. All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Any abstentions or opposition? Seeing none, we have Counselor Baker had to leave the room. So that is 6 to
0.
0 and 1 not voting.
Yep, one not
Do it
voting.
like that, okay.
It's approved.
All right, it's approved. And Director Heath?
Planning board as well, could they-
Planning board,
Yes, I guess I asked the planning board if they wanted to vote on this. Would vote for it unless there's any discussion, or we could have another meeting, but if we want to vote for it, if somebody could move.
So moved.
So I actually have one comment.
Okay.
If we're dealing with tweakings, on section 5.13.2 definitions, I think the last sentence in the G paragraph on embodied carbon should be put at the end of the I paragraph, if that's clear.
yes. And I don't know, could you say that again, Mr. Doringer, in life cycle assessment reports, that sentence?
So it's a sentence that begins, yes, in the life cycle assessment reports.
Under G, embodied carbon should be what?
It should be moved to the end of paragraph I in the definitions.
I'm not sure I'm following that.
So I would take the sentence in life cycle assessment reports and put it in paragraph I, which ends life cycle assessment.
I'm hearing what you're saying, but I'm not sure why
Oh,
we're.
it's that really the reports, the two reports that are discussed, the whole life cycle and the environmental production declaration come after, they follow the information that's provided on the two reports. So I thought it would be better to put the clarification of the life cycle and environmental product declarations at the end of
Also a reference
rather
to
than
life.
leaving where it is.
Sorry. There's also a reference to life cycle in the definition of embodied carbon, however.
Yes,
Guessing
but I was
that's-
putting it at the end of the whole section on reports. Small point, but
uh, uh, Ms. Silks, or your advisor, do you have anything to say about it? It's not something I expected to come up.
My thought is that it is still a discussion of the embodied carbon, but I see where you're coming from. I guess I'll turn to, I wonder if Mr. Webster has thoughts on this.
I guess that is the way I saw it, is that it was sort of a continuation of the explanation of embodied carbon as it applies to those types of reports, the LCA and EPD reports. I guess, it could be moved to I, but then I think you'd ask, why shouldn't it be under H, where whole building life cycle assessment is defined? Because that last sentence covers both whole building life cycle assessment as well as environmental product declarations. So, it seemed logically to kind of just get it all out of the way under the definition of embodied carbon.
Time you bring it up, yeah.
If the goal is to have all terms defined before using them in a definition, perhaps we can move H and I above G.
that would do it.
Right.
Good suggestion.
Okay, I'm gonna leave that up to the team myself. Well, we've already voted, but, yeah, I'm gonna let the planning board decide if it wants to vote. Leaving that up to the team.
So since you've already, Madam Chair, voted, that's the way it will go forward without the change.
Well, I'd be comfortable not changing it myself, because it's defined. But it doesn't, I would say it doesn't concern me one way or the other, particularly, sorry. I'm seeing nodding heads, so.
Yeah. So Peter, I guess, how important is this to you?
Not very.
Okay. So yeah,
Okay,
Move on.
we have a motion to approve this. I guess, all in favor?
Hi.
Any opposed? Okay, then it passes.
Abstain, Kevin, for the record.
That was 5-4 and 1 abstention.
okay. So Mr. French, I see your hand is still up, but the public hearing on this item is closed. And we have a long meeting ahead.
Can I just be quick, Madam Chair?
No, on this subject, no, we need to go on.
Okay, it's just that I don't think you can approve this yet until you've got a letter from the planning department.
We're very aware of that. They just voted.
Okay.
Thank you. All right. Thank you, everyone, for joining us this evening, who came in for this item. Ms. Silks and Mr. Webster and everyone who helped you out who's not here, and Attorney Lee. Thank you for your many, many, many hours of work crafting this. And I believe that Director Berwick actually did join us, may have already gone to her next meeting. But thank you, everyone. I know that you spent many more hours on this than I think you might have imagined you would need to over the last year. So thanks again. We took a step forward. Thank you. And our final item is actually, we're discussing two items at once, because relative to 3822, which is about zoning ordinance, the zoning ordinance regarding village centers. We are also simultaneously now discussing 3922, which is the discussion on state guidance for implementing the housing choice bill. Because as everyone knows, we are trying mightily to solve the MBTA communities puzzle to the degree possible through our zoning redesign efforts. So we got a lot of material ahead of the weekend, which was, for me, I'll say, a lot of fun to go through. It's a good step forward. It's mostly about the maps and how we can meet the MBTA community's rules by connecting some of the zones that have been designed on the VC 1, 2, and 3 and the new MRT zone into a contiguous parcel that is at least 50% of the total. And it is more than 50% of the total as of now. Though we've had this for the weekend and it's available online, the planning staff, Ms. Kyra and Mr. Lamel, are going to, in tandem somehow, both present this material to us tonight and to the public. So I'm going to ask, for their sake, and also a lot of folks talked to me after the last meeting, that we not interrupt with questions, that we allow the entire presentation to move forward. And that we can then go back through the presentation again, as we wish, the entire thing or any portion of it, to pick over things. I'm sure we're going to have a lot of questions and a lot of what ifs, and what if you do it this way, what if you do it that way. But if we could please allow them to complete the presentation in one shot, and hold your questions. You don't have a question?
I have a comment to say, I very much appreciate that.
All right, so we have a comment of great appreciation for the materials in the packet. It was a lot of fun to go through this, and after all we've been through, I personally found this very easy to assimilate from all the discussions that we've had. That doesn't mean we don't have a lot to discuss and so forth, but because we certainly do. And we will be continuing these discussions on May 8th with members of UTIL present. So if you have, just to comfort everyone to know that we're going to have another whole night on this to ask our questions and see, you know, how we want to push and pull things, if we do, to get to some consensus. So with that, either Ms. Kyra or Mr. Lamel, one of you is ready to start?
Sure, I'll kick things off. Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm just going to share my screen. Okay, so we're very excited to be here this evening with updated maps for the Village Center zoning. We're going to quickly recap how we got to this point, and then we're going to go through the updates for version 2.0, and then we're going to talk about what this means for MBTA communities compliance, and then how we move forward from here. So how we got here, just a quick recap. I know most of you have been following along. We've spent the last 2 years really thinking about what is best for village centers. And we started with a visioning process with the community and did further engagement over the past 2 years around this. And what we heard above and beyond was a real desire for vibrant village centers, for there to be more opportunities to live in village centers, to really support a diverse set of small businesses, to have places to gather, to, you know, be able to eat outside, to run into neighbors, all of these things. And what we've been doing since then is thinking about how we can help facilitate some of these goals through zoning. So again, this has been going on for about exactly 2 years. We've been focused on the village centers, and it started with a lot of data analysis and qualitative research. And then those led to priorities for zoning that came out of, that also came out of the engagement. We did analysis of the existing zoning. We did economic analysis of that zoning. We came up with a framework, which was a list of proposals to guide us in creating the first draft of the zoning. Further engagement, at the end of last year, we released the first version of the maps and the draft text. We had some more outreach based on those. And then in this committee over the last few months, we've been talking about how we go from version 1.0 to version 2.0. And that included a framework of some key changes that would be incorporated into the second version. Now I'm going to hand things off to Mr. Lamel to talk through the changes for version 2.0.
Thanks, Jen, and hi, everybody. Apologies for not being there in person, but looking forward to this conversation and obviously subsequent conversations to follow. So really grounding us again, this is the version 1.0 map that was released in October of last year. You can see the three tiered system that we put forward: Village Center 1, Village Center 2 and 3, so VC1, VC2, and VC3. You can see it's focused in on areas connected to the Green Line and commuter rail, as well as the historic village centers that have developed over time, very often before any zoning existed. Next slide. As Jen mentioned, between the release of version 1.0 and tonight, we did a lot of outreach. We did info sessions for each village center that were well attended, and these maps are snapshots of what we heard during those sessions. At the ZAP committee, at their January meetings, this committee, there was public comment taken on the version 1.0 maps and zoning. And then, as Jen mentioned again, in February and March, we had the workshops with all of you and many other counselors in attendance on key elements of the proposed zoning. Those are all listed here relating to how does it bring us into compliance with MBTA communities. And we're happy to say, and we'll say down the road, that this version 2.0 does or would bring us into compliance, making sure that there's a variety of housing opportunities and options being provided here, incentivizing or incentives built directly into the zoning for preservation and reuse of existing buildings, making sure that the parking requirements are appropriate, and really again incentivize the vibrant village centers that we're hearing and we know that people want, making sure that there's space for local and small businesses, and just amenities that are providing the community with the desired resources and needs. Open space, particularly along the sidewalk, as well as for larger sites to provide open space, places for gathering. There was concerns over the Village Center 1, the periphery neighborhood, which, as you see, we will be recommending that it is getting split into 2 zones. And then finally, a kind of look at the Green Line stations, given the amount of service along the Green Line, a greater focus along those MBTA stations. Next slide. And this here is the version 2.0 map. Jen is going to go into each village center specifically. There's also a high resolution map that was provided in your packet. We're also working on an interactive online map where you could toggle on and off version 1 and version 2. So not going to zoom in here.
Test the
but
microphone. Test the microphone.
Alan, you should mute yourself. Thanks. So just going to focus in here on a couple key points to think about as you're moving through. Very few changes were made along the north side of the city. Jen will get into those relating to local historic district properties, things like that. There really was a focus in on the Green Line, given the input that we received, given the requirements for MBTA communities, and you see that between Newton Center and the Elliott T station. And what I also want to call out is the splitting of what was VC1, the periphery zone neighborhood, and that what was VC1 is now only shown here in purple along Route 9. And then what was VC1 originally is now the MRT, multi-residence transit district, which I'll get into the details in a little bit. Next slide. So before going into each of the maps, I want to make sure everyone has a clear picture of what each of these zones allows. We can get a lot more into the dimensional standards at the upcoming meeting. But for Village Center 3, this is really the core of the larger village centers. It allows for 4.5-story buildings and really no major changes here, just a couple minor pieces relating to the setbacks. Next slide. For VC2, the same thing. It allows for 3.5 stories though. So we're stepping down as we're moving out from the village centers, from the core of the village centers. And again, just a few minor updates relating to the setbacks. Next slide. Here's where I want to focus our attention. So Village Center 1, VC1, this is the area that's only along Route 9. It is essentially the same metrics as what was proposed in the fall version 1.0. So it's 2.5-story buildings, a slightly larger footprint at about 4,000 square feet, and setback requirements that are similar to the residential buildings or commercial retail buildings that are there now. I would highly encourage anyone who hasn't walked along Route 9 recently to go and do it, because it really is a unique condition within the city, and that's why we believe this area warrants a kind of specific zoning framework. It's mostly a multifamily district with some limited retail or commercial space available for small businesses, really thinking about serving the communities that are around there, because there are some pockets of commercial and retail, as well as, again, residential that is lining Route 9 right now. Next slide. And so the MRT, the multi-residence transit, this is the peripheral village center zone that would surround all the village centers. It really would link the village centers to the surrounding neighborhoods. And this zone, these dimensional standards are the ones that are built off of the workshopping that's been done over the last 4 to 6 weeks at ZAP. So 2.5-story buildings for pitched roofs, 2-story buildings for flat roofs, and a much smaller reduced footprint of 1,500 square feet for new construction with a maximum of 4 units. And this is really to promote the adaptive reuse of existing homes that are in these MRT zones. We can get more into the adaptive reuse portion at the following meeting, where we talk about the zoning itself. But again, when you're thinking about the new construction, it really is a much smaller footprint and development space. And if you go to the next slide, you can see, and I'll also just say quickly, it's multifamily only, which was mentioned there, but we're only allowing multifamily development within these zones. But I think these examples are all Newton buildings. These are all Newton residential properties that exude or are roughly in alignment with the dimensional standards of the MRT zones. And so these buildings exist in and around our village centers. Pretty much all of them predate our zoning code. And here's just three examples with 4 to 6 units, again, roughly fitting in to the framework of what we would allow as new construction in the MRT zones. Next slide. As I mentioned, we want to incentivize adaptive reuse, truly incentivize the preservation of buildings. Here's just a couple examples of 4 to 7 units. We're again refining and working on those metrics, and we'll come back at a later meeting. But that is also built into the MRT zone preservation and adaptive reuse incentives. Next slide. And this is a question I think we get and want to make sure is very clear that the new construction allowance in the MRT zone is similar or smaller to what the current SR and MR zones allow, and the standards are really in alignment. The front setback is less than the SR and MR districts, but that is again because it is serving as that transition between the village centers and the neighborhoods beyond. So you want to create a stronger street presence with your buildings. You want to put the parking behind where possible. And when it comes to the building footprint, again, the maximum is 1,500. Although the current zoning does not have a building footprint standard, we typically are seeing much larger when it comes to the new 2-family construction. So between 2,000 and 2,500 square foot footprint. So again, smaller than what you're seeing, what I think a lot of counselors typically get complaints about. So while it allows for multifamily, it's allowing it in envelope that we think is conducive to really that missing middle housing that we're not seeing here in Newton. Next slide. And just to visualize what that is, moving from left to right, on the left side, it's an existing home that's been torn down at 472, 474 Watertown Street in Nonantum. And under construction right now is the rendering in the middle. Those trees that are in the background are not there. You can drive by. It's at the corner of Nevada Street and Watertown, almost a 2,500 square foot footprint. These are 2 units. And I think we all know that they are going to go for a significantly higher price than what was there before. But just going to the final image on the right, if you were to walk a few blocks towards the village center of Nonantum, you would hit this 4-unit building. I'm using it here really just for illustrative purposes, but essentially this is what we would allow in the MRT zone, just for comparisons with what the existing zoning allows for by right now. Next slide. Great, and I'm going to turn it back over to Jen to kind of zoom into each of the village center maps for the 2.0 version.
Great, thank you, Zach. So I'm going to relatively quickly go through these maps, just focusing on what has changed since version 1.0. So just as a refresher, the red areas are the Village Center 3, the blue is the Village Center 2, the purple is the new old version of Village Center 1, and then the green is our new multi-residence transit zone. And so in Newton Center here, there were some minor changes to some properties that in the VC2, VC3 zone, but the main changes were expanding the area to the south side of the T that is now included in the multi-residence transit zone. So again, this is a zone that Zach was just describing that allows up to 4 units in new construction and pretty small footprint, but incentivizes conversion of existing homes into multiple units. You can also see some of the black lines around certain streets. So those are our mixed use priority streets. And that's where parcels fronting those streets are required to have ground floor commercial uses. And we would not be counting those units for those parcels towards our MBTA communities compliance, because as we've discussed in this committee and as we've been workshopping, determined that it's just so critical that we get that ground floor commercial to really keep that vitality of the core of these village centers, that it's worth sacrificing some of those units in order to do so. So in Auburndale, we didn't make any changes other than adding in the mixed use priority streets. And we've also, for all village centers, we've removed any city-owned properties. So parking lots, buildings, schools, et cetera, we've removed from the Village Center overlay district. Again, in West Newton, no real changes, just adding the mixed use priority streets and removing any city-owned properties. In Newtonville, you can see the hatched area up, on the north side here. That's the local historic district. So we have removed any properties that are within a local historic district. So we took out some of the properties that were previously included in Newtonville. Otherwise, we mainly identified the mixed use priority streets here. Same Nonantum, no real changes, just the mixed use priority. Newton Corner, we did make a few tweaks in addition to identifying a few mixed use priority streets. We removed some of the areas sort of to the far east of this map along Honeywell and Washington Street based on feedback we received. And we made some changes between VC3, VC2, MRT, and made sure we removed all of the city-owned properties, including the schools. Lower Falls, again, just designated part of Washington Street as mixed use. And Woburn, we did make a few changes. So we identified some small areas of mixed use priority, and we removed areas that were previously zoned as VC1, and we focused this new MRT zone on sort of the major streets, Beacon Street and Wyman Street. Four Corners, very small changes up to the north about where the boundary ended and the mixed use priority. Upper Falls, again, we removed the one property that was in the local historic district, and we did expand what was VC1 is now this new MRT zone, a few properties to the west along Chestnut Street. Thompsonville, we just made a small change along Route 9 to the east and making those parcels VC3. Otherwise, no changes other than the mixed use. Newton Highlands, we did make some changes here, as you'll see in a couple slides. This is part of how we are connecting to Newton Center and Elliott in order to meet our contiguous area for MBTA communities. So we did not make any major changes to the VC3 or VC2 areas, but we did expand using this new zone, the MRT, towards Newton Center and towards Route 9. So this is all brand new. So this is surrounding the Elliott T station. So you can see the T stop there. And this is part of how we're creating one large contiguous area. So we expanded the zoning along Route 9, going west and east from the Elliott Station and Newton Highlands, mostly using this Village Center 1. So this is the original Village Center 1 that allowed for 2.5 stories, a 4,000 square foot footprint, and some limited commercial uses, but mostly multifamily. So this is focused just along the north and south side of Route 9. We did at major intersection here with Elliott add in VC3, although a good bit of this would be special permit due to the lot sizes, and a small portion of VC2 across the street where there is existing commercial businesses. So as you see here, this is the key change in the version 2.0 maps. So as we've been discussing, and as Zach will go into a bit more detail in a moment, in order to come into compliance with the MBTA Communities Law, we both have to meet our unit capacity, which is the amount of units that we're zoning for, not what is built or what does get built, but what the zoning would allow for. And we have to have half of our total area in one contiguous district. So in order to meet that, we have connected from along the Green Line from Newton Center to Newton Highlands to the Elliott Station and used part of Route 9 and gone along Center Street connecting the Highlands and Newton Center. And we used this new MRT zone, which is pretty low density, really prioritizing existing buildings to convert rather than be torn down, since it only allows a small amount of new construction. And the new construction fits in with the existing scale of buildings as well. So again, some of the key changes that I was highlighting as I went through these maps, just to reiterate, we are requiring ground floor commercial along certain portions of streets in almost all of the village centers. And we're just not counting those units for MBTA communities because the mixed use is a priority. We are using the old version of VC1, just along Route 9, and you can see a good image here of what that might look like. 2.5 stories with some limited commercial.
Jen, can I jump in here?
Yeah, please.
Just for the previous slide for the priority streets, not specific to the priority streets, but I want to make sure it's clear. In the Village Center 3 and the Village Center 2 zones, which allow for mixed use buildings, so ground floor commercial with residential above, fully residential buildings, if you're not along one of those priority streets where the black line is shown, it also allows for fully commercial buildings. I just want to make sure that that's clear, that someone would have the option, let's say along Langley Road, to develop a lot where the building, again, is mixed use, ground floor, retail, commercial with residential above, or a fully commercial building. I just want to, again, highlight that.
Great, that's a good point. Thank you, Zach. So then one other key change was just removing any parcels that are within a local historic district. And this was just in Newtonville and in Upper Falls where we overlapped with the historic districts. We also removed all city-owned parcels, as I mentioned. So this includes parking lots. It also includes city-owned buildings. And one of the assumptions in this is that parking is not required, but can be provided on site, and believe most likely will be provided on site. But we're not dictating the number of spaces that would be required. And we would also be requiring bicycle parking on site. Just as a reminder, our inclusionary zoning, which requires a base of 17.5% of units be designated permanently affordable at an average of 65% of area median income, still applies across the board anytime 7 or more units are built. We will need to do some sort of economic feasibility for MBTA communities, but we're confident that won't be an issue. And as we've been workshopping, we've been talking about in VC2 and VC3, allowing an additional story if that affordability percentage is increased to 25% and allowing a bit more in the building footprint. And there was also some thought of allowing the 2-story bonus in some very specific areas. So we're looking at what that might be for the draft that we'll be releasing prior to the next meeting. And I know we had talked about possibly needing to up the special permit threshold in order to come into compliance with MBTA communities, but we don't believe we need to do that. So all of this is assuming that we are keeping the same special permit threshold, which is any parcel that's 30,000 square feet or more would require a special permit, and any parcel between 20,000 and 30,000 square feet would require site plan review. And with that, I'm going to hand it back to Zach to talk about what this means for MBTA communities compliance.
Thank you. And I guess I kind of already gave it away that version 2.0 as proposed would bring us into compliance with the MBTA communities requirements. But stepping back, I just want to make sure that everyone realizes and understands that Newton is one of 176 communities that are looking to adopt by right multifamily zoning. I think in this committee and beyond, we talk about the need for housing across the region, across the state, and Newton plays one small part in that, right? The unit capacity overall is over 280,000 for these 176 communities. And just 2 weeks ago, or maybe it was last week, the town of Lexington approved their MBTA communities compliant zoning districts. So just want to situate Newton in the broader picture here. Next slide. So again, just backing up, for Newton, MBTA compliance means a district of at least 50 acres. As Jen mentioned, we need to have one contiguous district that is at least 50% of the acreage we submit. So if we submit 200 acres for compliance, we need at least 100 acres of those to be contiguous. Because we are looking at the village center zones as 4 sub-districts, right? Village center 1, 2, 3, and MRT. We need to make sure that every kind of sub area is over 5 acres. This will be important, so keep that in your mind. We need to have at least 90% of the land area within a half mile of the commuter rail or green line stations. And when it comes to the density and unit capacity, at least 15 units per acre, and a total unit capacity of 8330, so 8,330 units. Next slide. So this is what we had shared at the end of March. This was our version 1 village center maps. As you can see, if you go to the let's go to the next slide, I think, just to get to the punchline. It did not bring us into compliance. We only were achieving 3,500 units. We hit the density. We had enough land area. We were only looking at the areas within a half mile. Jen, if you go back. So you can just see we were only submitting through the MBTA compliance model that determines the unit capacity. We were only looking at the green line stations and the commuter rail stations in the areas that were within that half mile. So if you go back to the table, and none of those areas equaled 50% of 170 acres. So we didn't have that one large contiguous district. Next slide. So when we met at the end of March, we talked about a variety of tools or tweaks that we could push and pull on that could bring us into compliance. And one of those was looking at parking requirements. And when we did that, it was a real eye-opener for us. When we looked just at the version 1.0 maps, so no adding of parcels, no changing of the acreage, we nearly doubled the unit capacity when we didn't require on-site parking. Again, doesn't mean it would not be provided, but it is just not required. So no map changes, no additional parcels, no additional acreage, nearly doubling the unit capacity. And if we go back to the very beginning, right, we want vibrant village centers. We want quality design of space where people want to gather and be. This change would also really help us in that direction. You can see in this kind of typical historic downtown Main Street village center, there are no large garage door openings in these buildings. Imagine if a storefront in each of these buildings was taken away and replaced by an opening for parking. Imagine if one of these buildings was torn down and in order to meet the parking requirements, bought the building next door and tore that down and turned it into a parking lot. So I think not just for MBTA communities compliance, but for our goals of vibrancy and active life in our village centers, this removal of a requirement really opened a lot of doors. Next slide. Here is our version 2.0 village center maps, and you can see the units, the unit capacity when it comes to MBTA communities compliance for the various village centers. I wanted you to hold the minimum of 5 acres in your mind because as you can see here, Auburndale is no longer being included here. That is because when you talk about the priority streets, when you talk about lots only under 30,000 square feet, given that over 30,000 square feet requires a special permit, there isn't an area that's more than 5 acres, and therefore we could not submit it. Also, as I mentioned, when it comes to West Newton and Newtonville, we only removed lots. So again, this increase in units is really only due to not requiring on-site parking, even though, again, we would fully believe that most new development would provide at least some parking. And then as you can see, the majority of these units and the majority overall is being provided along the Green Line, along Route 9, and through Newton Highlands and Newton Center. Next slide. And I just wanted to zoom in again on that contiguous area. This space between Newton Center and the Elliott T-stop represents about 69% of what we would be submitting for MBTA communities compliance. Next slide. And this is just the table here. What this gets us is about 10,000 units as a unit capacity. Again, this is based on the MBTA compliance model. It is not a build out analysis. It is just what the state is requiring of us. We get a density of about 35 units per acre. The total land area is about 290 acres. And so again, I want to highlight why it's so critical to make the changes that we did. We didn't double the acreage. We only added about 100 acres to meet all the requirements, but we tripled the unit capacity to get us to where we needed to be. So that's why those changes are so important. And again, I mentioned that contiguous area is almost 70%, so well above our 50% requirement. And next slide. So where do we go from here? I think really looking forward to the conversation tonight. Really happy that this Village Center proposal links us to our MBTA communities requirements and compliance. As Jen and others mentioned, we're going to be sharing the accompanying draft zoning ordinance at the next meeting. This is similar to how we presented in the fall for version 1.0, following the budget season, coming back with additional discussion before what we hope can be leading into a public hearing at the end of June. So apologies for the long presentation. Thank you very much, and really looking forward to the discussion.
Wow. If folks who are online could mute themselves, we're getting some pop-up pictures now and again, depending on who's talking at home. That would be helpful. Thank you. Okay, that was a lot. I see questions at the table. I'll take you first. I just want to make sure that everybody knows that this is not a public hearing. This is the first time the City Council has heard this presentation. And first time the Planning Board has heard this presentation. So questions and comments from all councilors and members of the Planning Board are in order. So I believe Councilor Baker was first, followed by Councilor Wright, and then President Albright.
So my question, just to understand the presentation a little more clearly. Before we did the MBTA communities add-on, there was a one space per unit parking requirement as part of the Village Center. Just to be clear, I've got several clarifying questions. Does that now disappear for both? Or is it just only in the MBTA additional parts?
So I believe they did their analysis without a parking requirement, but my understanding was we were going to be able to look at what happens if you modify that.
I understand. I just need to understand that at least the analysis is not just the MBTA parcels have no parking. It's the VC parcels that were part of it. That some of them qualify, some don't because of the
Right.
streets are commercial. But I'm just trying to understand.
That's correct, Councilor Baker.
Yeah. All right. I just need to understand what's being presented. Okay. Second, as I understood it, the MBTA communities requires us to do the various things that Mr. Lamel has described because they have to be contiguous in a certain number of size and all of that. And that's a target. And we can all go back and talk about how they got to that number and all of that. But let's assume for our conversational purposes that that's what we're having to reach. If the net effect of adding the Village Center work that's gone on before to the MBTA communities, even without parking, just to understand the model, does that mean that we are actually producing the possibility of more housing units than the MBTA unit model requires? And as I understand it, then the question that will naturally come up from, I think, our constituents is, why are we doing more than what is required, as opposed to meeting what the MBTA communities requires? So that's different from the analysis, but it's a policy choice that I think I hope we'll discuss and understand. So that's, and then the last thing I think is that Mr. Lamel indicated that the next meeting, when we go into, we will talk a little bit about the modifications that they have made to some of the tables and some of the recommendations that are not related to parking, but go to setbacks and other things that were part of the presentation, but obviously are a much more detailed focus than the growth sort of concept that they're presenting. So that's sort of the context that I'd like to understand. And if that, so for example, the question of the implications, if you were complying with the MBTA community speech, does that mean that there is less height or less development in some of the other sites because you have now, you're covering the MBTA communities, but does that mean adjustments to the village center? We started with the village center zoning, going straight out, looking at that and saying it didn't get us there. Now we've added various things, at least in the presentation. We haven't decided anything besides. This is all understanding on the planning department presentation. But does this lead to a possibility that the planning department might recommend saying, okay, we might modify further the village center zoning scheme to reduce us down to the MBTA compliance rather than have the MBTA plus? And I don't know the answer to that, but that's a question I think we need to ask.
So the first question was answered. I'm going to ask if Mr. Lamel can address the second question, but I'll also offer that we started working on village center rezoning before MBTA communities was a thing.
No, I understand.
For reasons we all agreed were important. So yeah, there are places in the city that don't have transit that are village centers, right? So we want those to be healthy places. I guess that's the.
Well, that may be a judgment we make,
Right.
but there's a very different quality and quantity of members, obviously. if you're doing
I understand what you're saying. So your question really is about, this map, these sets of maps, as was just shown, are showing MBTA community compliance to enable, not produce. I think you used the word produce.
Well,
Enable more housing than what is required to enable, assuming that we're approved, and assuming we're submitting this. So that's one piece, but then the other piece is, are we doing some of the rest of this so that it, for other reasons, because we think it's good for the city. But I'm going to ask Mr. Lamel to talk about, and Ms. Kyra, to talk about the degree to which we push and pull from what we're seeing here, how are we moving forward to assess, are we in the right place?
Right, and a comment about parking, the reason I asked it, the picture of Brattleboro, I've been up and down that street, and I'm sure a number of us have. I actually recognized it before I read the caption, so it was kind of fun. But I do think the question of where the parking goes and how it's taken care of, because I think good planning would anticipate how to manage that parking if it's done voluntarily, as opposed to be required. You're going to have holes in the street or holes in the facade or someplace, and also the question is, where do those cars go? Because I understand that the economic analysis makes no parking requirement desirable from all the reasons that the planning department has just articulated. But does it still make sense from our perspective about what we want? That's a policy choice. Again, we need to think through, and I don't have a good answer, but I do think we need to understand what happens when people actually put it in. Would we rather explain what we want as opposed to sort of leaving it to the market to produce something that we might not like?
Okay, I'm gonna ask if Mr. Lamel wants to take on a piece of your question anyway, with respect to the push and pull between MBTA communities and the village centers, and how do we go forward from here to find the right mix?
Sure. I mean, I think it's a great question and one that we struggled with and thought about as we were developing this version 2.0 maps. And I think Chair Crossley, I think you put it well, that we've been working on the village center zoning well before the MBTA communities requirements came out. And this is really first and foremost thinking about what is best for Newton's village centers in all of their diversity, on the Green Line, on the commuter rail, not on a transit station, a historic mill village, et cetera, et cetera. And making sure that the zoning provides a flexible framework in place so that these spaces can evolve and change over time to meet the kind of uniqueness of each one. And so when it comes, we believe we've done that for our village centers in version 2.0. And in addition to that, provided a pathway towards MBTA compliance.
So in a degree to which we can push and pull over we have another meeting before we get into budget. And so we're gonna be taking a break to work on budget. I don't know if that's taking a break, but we're to work on budget and then we come back in June. I think all proposals are, that come from counselors can be considered at the table, as always.
I guess just to finish my thought, I think one thing we need to at least entertain for purposes of our conversation is what if we decided we were going to meet the MBTA community's goal with a combination of village centers and this, but no more, do we really want to add, it's one thing to add 8,000 units that the MBTA community is anticipating. Do we really want to add, as Mr. Lamel has indicated, far more than that? That's a significant change in the city. And that even though it's enabled and not built, as you pointed out, it's still a possibility. Otherwise, you wouldn't go through this exercise. So I think that's a policy choice we need to at least understand and clarify among the committee and because I'm sure we will be asked about it.
Okay, thank you.
Crossley, if I may just say one more thing to that. And again, I think Councilor Baker makes a great point, and the policymakers need to wrestle with. As I mentioned, market conditions change, and we want to make sure that the zoning provides the flexibility for that. Right now, someone might look at a piece of property and say, a fully commercial building just doesn't make sense. But in 2 years and 5 years from now, that very well may be different. As many of the buildings, the historic buildings, have changed over time from commercial to residential and back to commercial. So the unit capacity that we put forward in this presentation is a requirement that we need to submit for MBTA communities compliance. It is not a build out analysis, and we don't have a crystal ball here. So I think, as Councilor Baker rightly put, it's enabling through zoning. But within our best guess estimates, we would not expect or not believe we would see, all of a sudden a glut of units allowed. Just as we've said numerous times, our current zoning allows for thousands of units in more capacity than we have built out right now. So just want to keep that in mind as you're thinking about these changes.
Okay, thanks. I'm gonna, we have a lot of hands up now, so I would like to move on and everybody think about, I see almost everybody's hand is up. So we're Councilor Wright and then Councilor Albright. I'm gonna stick with the committee first. So I'll go back online to Councilor Krinsman and then we'll and there we go, and everybody. Okay.
I have quite a few questions and comments. I'm only going to do about half now, and then I'll come back afterwards. So I'm going to follow up to what Councilor Baker is. And can we pull up page 45 of the drawings that shows the city with the numbers? It'd be easier to talk to this. That one, yep, okay, so, and I went and did some analysis. So if we take a look in there and all those numbers of those villages come up to 10,000 units. But what's not counted in those 10,000 units are the priority streets, which typically for most of those areas are BC3. So in Newton Highlands, about 95% of the BC3 is not counted. In Newtonville, it's a little over 50%. In West Newton, it's about 30% not counted. Newton Center, and if you take out the big lots and that, it's about 50% that's not counted. And Waban is about 50%, but that's VC2. So one of the things which I've requested a couple of ZAP meetings ago, and I also sent out an email, is to get the total number of units that this is generating, not just for MBTA, but the total number, including the priority streets that are excluded, including, you know, Newton Corner and things like that. My estimate is that this is, you know, increasing housing by 50%. But until we get that number, you know, this is way more than 25%. So that would be good to know. And if we are going to do that, and again, it's not going to be all built at once, but it'll be more of a step function. Just like the Washington Street Vision Plan, you know, we're 1/3 of the way there. That's in the pipeline after 3 or 4 years without zoning. So I would see this more of a step function where you get a big jump of units and then it'll slowly increase. But right now and this is more of a policy question we have to look at, we're building a new pool. Do we need to increase the size of our pool? We're building a new senior center. Do we need to increase that? We are getting additional students, even though the general student population is going down, the high schools are growing every year. Do we need to build a 4th high school? We have a 3rd one, but that's kind of in the parking lot. But those are questions. We have a 3rd high school, Central.
Oh, yeah, that's true.
Yeah, so this would be a 4th one. So these are things we got to think about. You know, if we're going to do this. And let's say, okay, this is a 50% increase in numbers. So instead of 10,000, it's really 15,000, which we're being overachievers with the MBTA and everything else. Is why not take everything that's VC3 and make it VC2? And then, which is 3.5 stories. And I think you would get a lot more acceptance from the community if you did that. And then in some places, and we can go by village, determine if there's a block that could be VC3. So maybe on Langley, on the north side where the Walgreens is, maybe that block could be VC3. Maybe the south side of Washington Street, next to the Pike, you know. So, but if we go and do that and look which areas, instead of making everything, not everything, but quite a bit areas VC3, which right now could be 5 stories and then a possibility of 6 or 7 stories. Most, or I should say Lexington, most of theirs is 4 stories, possibly 5, except for one small area, which is their business district. Brookline is doing maximum 4 stories. When we're going up 5, 6, 7 stories, to me, it's changing our villages into cities. And a lot of people think, you know, villages are more 3 or 4 stories, possibly 5. So I think that's something we need to think about how we're going to go about this. And I didn't know, I did send that email out, Mr. Heath. I was just wondering when you might be able to get those numbers.
Yeah, no, we did get that over the weekend, and I think we can have those numbers for the next time when it's out.
And another way too, and back on your the planning department memo on 3/29/23, you had a great chart in there where you broke it up, how many acres and how many total units, density VC1, VC2, VC3. If you could do it that way too, I think that, and it also gives your gross density there. I think that's helpful also. A question on when you're determining the density, and are you assuming just 1 building per lot? we talked about possibly another building if by special permit. So are you just determining one building per lot?
So I'd have to connect with you, Teal, but it's basically how the compliance model works. So we're somewhat limited to how the compliance model functions. And I think the short answer is yes. But again, we're working within the limitations of the compliance model itself.
Okay, and now I'd like to go to page 17 on the presentation where you gave the example of in Nonantum 472 and 474, yep, Watertown Street. So those are two examples of what could go on the lot, what could go now, and then the proposed zoning. My question is, in the proposed zoning, lots don't have any requirement for a minimum frontage or an area. What would stop someone from dividing that lot in half? Is there any reason why they couldn't divide it in half and put three unit buildings on there? So that lot, and I did some analysis on there. So that lot specifically on here, which you have, it's 9,235 square feet. And so the frontage is 95 feet. And in MR1 right now, you need 80 feet, I believe, for a new lot if you're going to subdivide. Well, could someone who buys that lot say that, okay, I want to use the new proposed zoning, I'm going to divide that lot in half. So it would be 47.5 feet wide by 97 feet long. And a 1,500 square foot building is 25 by 60. And they could put in a driveway and add a couple parking spots in the back. And I did a drawing of what it would look like.
Council, right? We have like 10, 12 people
Okay.
who would like to speak, so I wonder if you could just shorten your question.
So the question is, can you subdivide lots?
Yes.
So,
Yeah,
so
I'm
any of these lots, so there's no minimum requirements of frontage or how big the lot is. So for a VC1, and I did the calculations, if I did
Could you let them answer the question? And
Yeah,
then-
I mean, I think that the short answer is yes. And I would really encourage you, Councilor Wright, to walk the streets of Nonantum. There's plenty of lots that are 45 feet wide and 50 feet wide that have smaller buildings on them. And it's a policy question, right? Do you want to allow one larger 2-unit building where these units are being sold for $1.8 to $2 million a piece? Or do you want to allow 2 smaller buildings with maybe 3 units in each of them that are more in line with the fabric of these neighborhoods? So again, if you were to walk down Adams Street, or again, just any other street in Nonantum or off of our village centers, I think you would typically see Floral Street in Newton Highlands is a great example. You'd see those 40, 45, 50 foot wide lots with smaller buildings on them. But again, it's a policy question.
Yeah, so, but one of the things what I like about VC1 is we're trying to keep the old Victorians, and they might be 3,500, 4,000 square feet. And they're on a reasonable sized lot. If we allow the subdivision without any constraints on frontage, then someone could tear that down and put in 2 3,800 square foot buildings on there. So instead of that
You mean
one.
MRT. I think you mean the MRT.
Yeah. Sorry, yeah, not VC1,
Not
but
to
the MRT.
confuse
Yes,
with the VC1, which is
Yeah,
now a
yeah.
totally different
Yes.
animal.
So I'm worried that there's going to be a lot of pressure then for a lot more tear downs. You know, the idea being we want to keep the big older houses, but if I think you should, if you want to subdivide the lot, you got to use what we have in our present zoning. And you need to do that first before you subdivide it. I know some lots are really big and yes, you could do it, but here, so a 1,500 square foot footprint, if I use 20, and this is my last thing, and then I'll let someone else talk. If you could be 25 feet by 60 feet, Now, if you do that and use the setbacks and things like that, that building could fit on a 3,400 square foot lot. So, so you could, if you have a 12,000 square foot lot, you could break it up into, 3 separate lots and put more buildings on there, and then you would lose the building that's on there right now. So I think that's something we need to think about.
Can I phrase your comment question a little bit differently? Because I think this newer zone that has been designed to meet a particular need or want is MRT zone. We haven't really vetted it yet. There's so many different shapes and sizes of lots in the city. And there's already some very helpful commentary from different groups and individuals that we got even just this weekend, right after this material came out, asking the question, are we drawing the right lines to put the incentives where we say we want them, right? So if that's where you're going with this, I agree that we need to look at, we're not gonna be able to write zoning that's gonna be perfect for every single lot or every single condition or every single property owner who wants to do something. What we want is multifamily housing within a quarter mile of the T-stop or so, then are we providing enough incentive to create that in that lower scale district with the existing houses so that we keep the existing houses? Are we giving them enough additional footage to make that a desirable outcome so that we preserve the housing and it can be converted?
And I'm all for it, and I think that's great. But what I'm saying right now, there's no safeguards in there for someone to come in, and if they have a 12,000 square foot lot, to tear down the 4,000 square foot Victorian and put up, 3 of these houses, which is Barney showed. I showed him Mr. Heath, which is being built right now in Nonantum, these long skinny houses. So that's my big concern there.
Okay.
So it's just a big incentive for tear downs.
Let's put that on the table and move on. Maybe I could see the hands that are up, but I think that President Albright is next.
So actually, I'm gonna build on Council Wright's question and had a conversation with Mr. Lamel earlier because I was wondering, the underlying zoning allows you to build bigger. Just as that picture showed, the big 2-family. So I was wondering if we could do, if not we, but if the planning department could speak to either some local developers or land-wise to find out where is the incentive, the financial incentive? Is it to build the 2 large two unit thing where you sell each side for 1.8 million, or is it dividing the lot and building smaller units? I would love to know the finances of it. What, if you're a developer and your goal is to make money, where do you make the money? By doing the big ones, doing the little ones? Where is that? Where does it balance out? Because I think that would help us make our minds up about whether this works or not. If the incentive is for the big one, then we haven't achieved anything.
Director Heath?
Yeah, so one way to look at it is you're gonna get the value out of that land that you can get. So whether it's in 2 units or 6 units. But the assumption is that if you have 6 units, the price for each unit is gonna be less because it's gonna be a little more desirable than the bigger units.
Well, he's smaller. I don't know.
Exactly. So it's either 2 or 6 or whatever the calculation is, but you're gonna get the same amount out of the land value. So it's in terms of the built form. So, but you're right, we can take a look at that. We can ask Landwise to look at that and see if there's an incentive one way
So
or the
your
other.
assumption is that selling 6 units would equal selling the 2 large units?
Correct.
Well, I'd love to know if that's true or
Or
not.
better it, it should better it,
Yeah.
because the 2 units
I would hope.
can
it would
build you a
better.
larger footprint.
But so if we could find that out, I think it would help us a lot.
Okay.
Otherwise, it was a great presentation, you guys.
Okay. All set. Otherwise, I'm ready to. It's a process. And we're doing what we're supposed to be doing right now. So, which is, throwing a few soft darts, right? Counselor Krinsman.
Thank you. President Albright's question is a good one. It has to do with sort of the financial incentives and what we're more likely to get on those parcels, whether it's, the underlying zoning or the overlay district, which one is more likely to be utilized. So I look forward to that answer as well. My question is about the MRT versus VC1. And I asked this in particular regarding Auburndale. And I think it's also maybe Newton Corner and Thompsonville, where those village centers are essentially removed from the MBTA communities calculation. And I'm just curious about the decision to take a bunch of those parcels and make them MRT as opposed to potentially BC1. What did that sort of decision look like? And do you think, are there other areas for commercial in those places where we're not in need of the housing? Given that the two zones are similar, not identical, but similar.
Are you asking if there are some areas that we zoned MRT that maybe should be VC1 so that they could allow for some commercial?
Yeah, I don't necessarily have an opinion one way or the other. I'm just curious about what the analysis was to, I think all three right now have several parcels that are MRT. And it felt like maybe it was because you were trying to tend towards something equal to or lesser than what is zoned for now, as opposed to a more dramatic change. But I'm just curious to sort of understand the thinking again, because I think those three village centers have been removed from the MBTA communities calculation. So you have full flexibility there to not, tend towards housing, but to, sort of more freedom to look at the two and what's going to make for a more vibrant village center. Sort of going back to the initial slide that you presented, Zach, about, what are we trying to do in these places?
I mean, that's a really good question. I think I would say one of the things was we kind of zoomed into Route 9 and the unique characteristics that are there. However, that's Thompsonville, so we kind of lose that one. But what I would say is, and we could do this calculation, and it's something that Councilor Wright brought up, is really looking at the acreage between VC1, VC2, VC3, and MRT. And I think what you would see for Thompsonville, for Auburndale, and I think Newton Corner, what you mentioned, the majority of the lots are zoned VC2 and VC3, which allow again for either or required mixed use, fully commercial. And so I think the percentages allowed for commercial are still fairly high in all of those village centers. But point taken, and I think hopefully if others bring it up, we can dive in and look if VC1 is appropriate in some of these other places.
Okay, thanks, appreciate that. And again, I would just love to sort of maybe understand what you think between the two, what incentivizes what, and then we can maybe decide what's more appropriate. But overall, I just want to say, I think the sort of bones, the structure of this proposal are fantastic. I am really supportive of this. I think you guys did a great job at coming up with ways to comply with the MBTA Communities Act, placing, the potential growth and the zoning expansions in the right parts of the city and in the right parcels, and found very creative ways to do it in a way that I think makes a lot of sense. So, I think we definitely have some tweaking to do here or there, but I applaud this work. I think it's great. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Krinsman. Councilor Leary, and then Dan Burke.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just want to say also that I was so impressed with the amount of work that has been done with the 2.0 map. That section between Newton Center, going through Newton Highlands and along Elliott Street is brilliant. It was, you've got us there to the MBTA communities. And I just thought that was a great tie-in to get us to that contiguous area. And it's especially along the Route 9 area and the VC3 where that CBX is, or around the Newton Highlands area on Route 9. So I just want to say I could see that there, a lot of work went into this. I think we worked to combine a number of competing interests between our housing needs and neighborhood scale. And I think we're a lot closer. Of course, we're just seeing this now in the last few days. So I think there's still a lot that needs to sink in and think about, as Councilor Wright's questions came up. One of my thoughts also on the MRT actually was the 1,500 square foot footprint is pretty small. And I'm wondering if that really would actually incentivize them to use the underlying zoning versus the MRT zoning. I could see how maybe some of those houses would be could be torn down rather than preserved. So I have some concerns about that, and I'm not sure what the answer is yet. So I think currently though, the underlying zoning, they can build bigger than the MRT, and I think they would go with that. So I'd like to have more discussion about that, the MRT, the role and our goals, and again, some of the economic impacts as well. So thank you.
Yeah, and I think we definitely want to dig into the MRT more. I think just to say briefly, what we're trying to do is not necessarily solving all of the issues with this. So there are, potentially issues with the underlying zoning that may not be able to solve through this effort. What we're trying to do is provide other options. So right now, your options, if you have one of these large single family homes or these older homes in these zones, is to keep it or tear it down and build oftentimes a larger single or two family. As you've seen, people are often taking the larger single or two family. What we're trying to do through this is provide an alternative. So right now you can't keep it and convert it to multiple units. So we're hoping that in some, hopefully many cases, that is a more attractive alternative. Or if you do choose to tear it down, that you choose to do multiple units instead. But it is difficult to both incentivize the preservation of the existing homes and solve the underlying zoning that's existing and all the problems in that, and provide an option that counts towards MBTA communities.
So what you're saying is that we need to go back and repair the existing zoning at some point in the not too distant future.
Yeah, I mean, I think if we don't like what's being built under the existing zoning, and this is providing new options, but the existing zoning will still exist, you have to go in and fix the existing zoning if you want to prevent those things from being built. We're going to give some alternatives. I think they're fairly attractive alternatives, but we're not saying we're solving all of the problems with the existing zoning through this.
Thank you. So
yeah, I like just my last comment is I would actually like to see more, more units and smaller units to be built, because that's a real need for, and that would naturally, of course, the smaller units would actually be more affordable. So if we could find a way to incentivize that, that would please me very much.
There's a policy piece to think about whether the option should be retained or whether you should be done. That's an issue that I think is cooking up.
It is kind of coming up, but I think, well, it was some time ago, but Ms. Carr, maybe you want to comment on this. We some time ago talked about the value of having an overlay district versus simply a new zone, simply rezoning. And my understanding at the time was, and you could please elaborate and correct me, whatever the right thing to do is that, trying to totally replace the underlying zone was more complicated. Meant we had to do more work on certain things. Can you be clearer than that?
I can try. There are some benefits to the overlay, and that it's sort of its own self-contained section of the ordinance, and we can write new rules, we can go about things differently. One of the other reasons, because we've had the same sort of thoughts and conversations internally too, does it make sense just to rezone or have the overlay? Part of it is we are applying the overlay in some areas that are two families, there may be some single family homes, and we're really trying to get more units and smaller units, just what Councilor Larry said. So we're not looking for new large single family homes to be built as part of this zoning. So in order to not make all of those homes non-conforming and make things more difficult for those homeowners, if they're going to do small additions, repairs, et cetera, to their homes, it makes sense for them to still be able to utilize the underlying zoning. So it does get more complicated, particularly in the MRT zone, if we were to just rezone entirely rather than have the overlay as an option.
Okay, thank you. That was a good reminder. Councilor Danberg, when I go back on the board.
Yes, a lot of the items that I was thinking about have already been brought up, so I won't repeat them. I would also like to see or make sure that the incentives are there for more smaller units as opposed to fewer larger units. On the, I'm not sure what page it is, it's the 472, 474 Watertown Street, if you can pull that up. The middle photograph shows what we're seeing proliferate around the city. And that is what I refer to as a black and white box. There are lots of black and white boxes that are appearing. This particular one shows a great deal of asphalt in the front yard. I think, I don't know whether this is an accurate rendition of how much asphalt is needed to go up to create a path up to the front door. But one of the questions that I have here, and if you are allowed to have a different height, if you have a flat roof as opposed to a pitched roof, is this a pitched roof or is this a flat roof? On a pitch, the middle one.
It's pitch black.
Is that, yeah, do you need to have a pitch up and a pitch down in order for it to be pitched, or can you just slope it in
There's
one
one like
direction
that
and
on my
call it a
street.
pitched roof?
Yes, can.
And call
So we do require a minimum degree of pitch. I will say also, I believe ISC has some interpretations around that as well, where I don't think you can just have this sort of one pitch and call it a half story and meet all of the requirements. But no, you would need the full pitch, and it would need to be at a minimum angle.
So does that mean that this house could not be built under the new definition of pitched roof?
That's correct. It also is just 2 units, and we would be requiring a minimum of 3.
Yeah, okay, all right, that's helpful. Yes, and I think that what we would like to do is make sure that we try to incentivize retention of old Victorian homes. There are some homes that I think are less, I hate to use the word desirable, but less interesting, like the house on the left-hand side, the brick one. But I think we do want to keep our beautiful old turn of the century Victorians and make it disincentivize the tearing down of these houses. But thank you all for all of the work that you've put into this. I agree that the what I would term the snake of the circles that goes along the green line was very well done. And I think that has allowed us to come to the requirement, to make the requirement that the areas be contiguous, while it allows the proliferation of these houses through a wide swath of Newton and doesn't just concentrate them in one place.
The Python, you're talking.
For the Python.
having eaten several wraps. Yeah. All set.
I'm set.
All right, thank you. Can I see who's online again, please? Thank you. Counselor Downs, you're next.
Thank you, and I will echo my colleagues' comments about the tremendous amount of work that this represents. And I like the continuous stretch. I also, however, am concerned that VC1 is now only on Route 9. I think we need to think a little more broadly about where VC1 might also be appropriate, because it does seem fairly, you know, when you think about Route 9 too, particularly in this area, it functions as a highway. So commercial on the first floor, while there is some, requires very large driveways in front. And to me, that isn't what is most attractive about Newton. So, you know, well, some commercial may be advisable and attractive. I'm not sure that, I think the size could be right, but I don't think the retail is right for that, for as much of that as is outlined here. I really would like to see an analysis done of underlying zoning versus the MRT zoning for some of these areas, because my suspicion is with the footprint restrictions, particularly on new construction, we're not going to see the preservation of current housing, but we will see the tear downs and the continuing, you know, 1 and 2 families going in. We need to do an economic analysis to see if that would happen. I think before we do this, otherwise we're really kidding ourselves that we're going to get this housing built here, or that anything is going to change. And remember, you got to put in 2 staircases, fireproofing. You know, you can't get any elevators in. You've got to put in more kitchens. That adds a lot of extra expense, even if you remove the parking requirement here. So I wonder if that actually presents an opportunity, and that worries me. So those are my 2 comments and, I guess, questions. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Downs. Are we planning or considering some more economic analysis of any level to understand? Ms. Kyra, for example, you were very clear about the flaws in our underlying zoning. But to counter that, is there a way we can test fit some of the sites to see, you know, this with a 1,500 square foot footprint, does that versus how much we should allow for the existing building? So we want to preserve the existing building. It's whether it's a Victorian or a turn of the century colonial, whatever it is, some good sized Lincoln Street, the Lincoln Street homes. You know, there was a suggestion to add allow more than 400 square feet in the back. How are we going to understand what the right incentive should be? How much more square footage should we allow in order to make that what most people will choose?
I'm happy to just quickly jump in here and say, I think a level of financial analysis for this makes complete sense. What gets difficult is something you alluded to, is that the variety of lots and conditions are much more varied in these situations. Do you want to preserve the building? Maybe you don't want to preserve the building. Maybe that Watertown Street example was one where you didn't want to preserve it. Will it be subdivided? Won't it be subdivided? So the analysis can be done drawing broader conclusions is tough. It's definitely tougher. So I think we can look and think a bit more on possible scenarios, and I hope at the next meeting we can discuss true incentives for the preservation of the buildings we want to preserve when it comes to, you know, footprint, size, number of units, as well as look a little bit more creatively for new construction within the MRT zones, and what is financially viable and better than what we're seeing get built now.
Okay, thank you for that. Councilor Laredo and then Linboff.
Thank you, Madam Chair. First, a question for Mr. Lamel, and then some more general questions as I try to better understand not only what's being proposed, but how you came up with the numbers here. So Mr. Lamel, you showed us a picture of what looked like Vermont or New Hampshire with a village front with no driveways on it, which I have to agree with you, look great. Exactly what we want in a village center. However, did you do any analysis as to whether there was parking directly behind those buildings or a public lot anywhere nearby or anything like that?
In some instances there are, but not in all.
In the one in the picture you showed us, the example, is there parking behind there? Is there a large lot nearby?
I think some of those have private lots in the back. Others don't have any parking. I'm not sure on the public parking availability.
I say that because, for example, in Newtonville, Bram Way, as we all know, is parking right behind the stores there. If you go to the Back Bay, for example, lots of the housing is parking behind the houses, entered through an alleyway. I happen to think that's a very attractive way of providing both a coherent frontage, which we all want, but some ability to have parking that's really tucked in. So I wonder, I know you're not requiring parking, at least in this version, but I wonder if you gave some thought to how you might achieve that, because that accomplishes twin goals, it seems to me. And not only that, but if you're going to have first floor retail, it also, or restaurants, it also allows for the ability to have delivery trucks behind the buildings rather than in front, because as we all know, if you do it in front, you create traffic jams. Newtonville, Walnut Street in Newtonville is a perfect example. You do not want large trucks parked on Walnut Street on a one lane with trying to accommodate bikes and so forth. So when you come back, I'd like to hear a little bit more analysis about that. Number two, you are requiring bike parking everywhere in this new zone?
It would be based on the
That's
use,
correct.
but yes.
Why? I mean, what if you're, say you're building a unit, or I'm building a 3-family building there, and I'm planning on putting a group of elderly relatives, just for example, who do not bike. Why would we require that kind of, if we're not going to require parking, why would we require bike storage? I think bike storage might be very desirable, but it seems to me that requiring it goes too far. And I'd like your thoughts on that. You don't have to do that this evening. I'd also like to know, if you eliminated the bike storage requirement, how many additional units could you get in the exact same area? I mean, you did that analysis for cars, and I don't want to be taken, don't get me wrong, I'm very pro bike, all right? My bike is hanging in my garage basement right now, okay? But you are now mandating something. At the same time, you're telling people they don't have to do anything else. And I just don't understand it frankly, for a 3 or 4 unit building, that you would tell the owners they must have a certain level of bike storage, particularly when bike storage in those kind of settings could easily be done with a hook drilled into a ceiling in a basement storage area. So I really think that warrants some discussion. I want to understand, maybe Ms. Kyra, you can help me a little bit here. I want to understand better the constraints on and on either subdividing lots so that you avoid certain requirements, or aggregating lots, but just under the 30,000 square foot limit, and what effect those kinds of activities would have on your analysis, if any.
So when you ask what effect they would have on our analysis, do you mean our calculations for MBTA communities?
Yes.
Okay. So we cannot assume aggregation or subdivision of lots as part of the model for compliance. We may be able to make a strong case that there are some specific circumstance where it makes sense to sort of override the model for one particular location and work with the state on that. But in general, you're working with the existing land pattern.
So, just so I understand, Ms. Kyra, does that mean you're taking the existing boundaries of existing parcels and using that for your analysis?
That's correct.
Okay, but let us say that the average parcels may be what, 7,000, 8,000, 10,000 square feet in most places in the city. And forgive me, in acres, how many, just remind us, how many square feet is an acre?
43,560.
You're much quicker at it than I am. But you could certainly aggregate 3, 4, or even 5 parcels together. And what effect, if any, would that have on what would get built there? And conversely, what effect would happen if you took a 3-acre parcel and divided that up into, 4 or 5,000 square foot parcels?
So for aggregating parcels, that's partly why we are controlling things by building footprint too. So right now, what we see is exactly that. You aggregate a number of parcels, you get one large lot, you build one large building. There are a lot of efficiencies in building one large building. What we're trying to do is to really see more incremental growth and see more infill development. So you still get the same maximum building footprint, even if you combine a bunch of parcels. So that's often going to be the controlling factor, even more so than the lot size. You can subdivide, and that, I think, as I think Zach was saying earlier, is a policy decision. We think it is often more attractive to have a few smaller buildings that fit more with the scale of what's existing, rather than one large building. So breaking up some of those large sites into smaller sites and building smaller buildings on them, I think in most cases would be a good outcome.
So what, I guess we'll need to get back to this when we actually look at the setback requirements and so forth. But I am concerned about, I don't think it's a good idea for us as a policy measure to view the lots as static, because any developer worth his or her salt is going to be able to come in and buy multiple lots at the same time and then develop accordingly. So I do think we need to see in the next go round some analyses of that. And I want to be careful that we don't cherry pick those analyses. Just a couple of other questions, and I'll certainly defer to others. We have a 30,000 square foot minimum before you have to have a special permit. Does that comply with MBTA communities? And if so, how?
Yes.
So? Is that the minimum that MBTA communities law says we have to be at?
No, MBTA communities leaves it to the community to figure out how to reach the unit capacity by right. So we're not counting any units for parcels that are over 30,000 square feet.
When you say you're not counting any parcels over 30,000 square feet, if there's an acre parcel, you're excluding it from your analyses?
We're excluding it from the compliance model, because you could not build anything by right on that parcel.
So if you go down your corridor in Newton Center, for example, and there's a parcel of land that's an acre, you've excluded that from the analyses completely?
We've excluded it from the MBTA communities compliance model. So we're still analyzing all of these parcels and what could get built and considering them when setting the zoning requirements, but we can't change the lot configurations for the compliance model, and we can't count any parcel where you cannot develop by right.
When you come back to us, can you tell us how many parcels are above 30,000 feet in size that we're omitting? And I say that because your own analysis said you're going to create potential to build 10,000 more units approximately. But if you've excluded all of these sites, then those sites are prime places to develop, I presume. I mean, a developer would come in and tear down a house on an acre site and be able to divide that into 3 or 4 parcels and build 12 units. Developers likely to do that, I presume.
Potentially. So you're talking about subdividing, not coming in for a special permit.
I'm talking about subdividing. You come in, you buy that acre, which you haven't counted at all in your analysis. You tear down the existing 3,000 square foot house there, and you subdivide into maybe 5. I figure you could divide into 5 or 6 different parcels and build a 5-unit or 6-unit building in each one.
So, yeah, so there aren't a lot of acre sites, I'll say, and there aren't a lot in the where there would be an incentive to divide it up into that many parcels. So most of the larger, you can only do 4 units new construction in the MRT. There aren't a lot of acre sites or larger single family home sites in this area. There are in the city. We're sticking pretty close to the village centers where you have a much smaller pattern of parcel sizes.
You could take your acre site, and you said you can only put 4 units per parcel, but you could make that parcel pretty small and put a whole bunch of 4-unit buildings on there.
Potentially, there are, we can get into this more at a future meeting, but it is expensive to build a lot of individual buildings. So just because you're getting around a special permit doesn't mean the incentive is always going to be there to subdivide into a bunch of small lots and max out a bunch of small buildings.
I guess at a future meeting, I'd like to see that economic analysis and the backup for it. I'd like to understand how many lots in this area, commercial, what are currently commercial and are currently residential, are being excluded. And we should at least be factoring in how much could be added to them. I think I've taken far too much of the committee's time, so I'll leave it at that. And thank you very much. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Councilor Rado. Councilor Lipow.
Thank you. A few things here. When people say you can cut an acre lot into 5 lots, you need the correct frontage, right? I mean, you need to take a look at what that lot looks like. It's under this zoning, you can't just cut it into 5 lots, can you, Zach?
Go ahead, Mr.
Right. So each of the buildings, while Councilor Wright is correct that there isn't a minimum frontage requirement, there is a facade requirement. So the building needs to be, a certain percentage of the building needs to be oriented to the street. So you couldn't put numerous buildings, one behind the other, where that frontage of the building, the facade, isn't being met. So if you have a very long amount of frontage and you can meet the various setbacks and each of those buildings can be oriented to the street, then yes. But again, that's a unique condition that doesn't happen everywhere.
You also need access for each of those parcels. So you're going to be constrained by a sort of typical building width as well as a driveway width.
Well, thank you. This is what I'm trying to present to everybody here, that it's not 5 lots willy-nilly like that. There's a lot of dimensional requirements and site-specific situations that are not going to make it that easy to do that many lots. That's number one. Number two, my day job lends me to talk about the economic situation here between the underlying zoning and MRT. You are always going to make more money if that's your incentive to do 2 big units instead of 4 small units. I've done the analysis, I've done it for lenders and for developers who have said, what's the best thing to do here? Those small units adding up are not going to reach the value of those 2. And Councillor Downs said something I wanted to say, which is not only retrofitting those an existing building or the cost of that, and then building new 6 kitchens, 12 bathrooms, everything that comes with that. The analysis is easy to do. When we're looking at the new MRT, and by the way, I love where this has gone and I'm really excited. We've made tons of progress, but the MRT is new and that's what I'm focusing on. The underlying zoning is always going to win here. Okay, it really is. So what I'm thinking is, and you guys have had a puzzle that you've needed to put together, and you got over 8,000 units because of the 4 units allowed in the MRT. Would you say that is what pushed you over? Okay, it is. Okay, but it's not super realistic that any of that is really ever going to happen. Love to see it, but I don't think it is. And another question I want to ask you, and this is new territory, so you may not be able to answer, but when the state takes a look at this and counts what we're putting forward, are they going to look at the underlying zoning and what we're proposing and just simply take the 4 units, or are they going to look and say, that may not be so realistic, we're not going to give you all of those units? Can you comment on that?
Yeah, so our understanding is they're not doing that level of analysis. What they are looking at is, you say 4 units are allowed, but have you applied so many other dimensional controls that you can't actually realistically fit 4 units? So if we said you could do 4 units max, but we had huge setbacks and a really low FAR or building footprint, and it just wasn't physically feasible to fit the 4 units, then they wouldn't count it. But they're not doing sort of a market analysis of what your options are. But I think your point is well taken, and that's what I was trying to get at earlier. It's hard to go up against that existing zoning that allows 2 very large units right now, because that is a very attractive option. So without addressing the underlying zoning and this at the same time, it's hard to come up with something that meets all of our goals.
It really is
competitive against the
so it's
large
interesting.
units.
So what's interesting here is MRT may get us what we need with the MBTA communities. It may make people happy who don't want too many units. It makes people unhappy that want more units, but do not really see this as a vehicle to get it. So this is the underlying dissatisfaction, I think, on different levels with what's going on here. It's part of our process to find out where we end up. I applaud you for bringing this forward. It does solve some things, but not everything. And in the end, I don't know if we're going to be able to have everything. You've definitely made progress, but I think you hear from a lot of people that there are questions, the battle between the underlying and the MRT and what we really get for it. Thanks.
Chair Crossley, and this may be not to be answered now, but given Councillor Lipoff brought up his professional credentials, I would pose, and not to answer now, but think of a street in Newton that has 50 by 100 square foot, 50 by 100 lots, so 5,000 square feet, and maybe there's a 10,000 square foot lot, 100 by 100 double lot. The underlying zoning for 2 units is pretty powerful, right? It's the draw to do that. I think, as Councillor Wright and others were saying about subdivision, maybe the 4 unit isn't enough to overcome the underlying zoning, but maybe splitting those into 2 5,000 square foot lots for 8 units maybe it does, maybe it doesn't. But again, maybe you can come back and we can talk offline with you as an appraiser, not as a counselor.
Sure, happy to do it.
Okay, thank you very much. Let's see, who's next? Counselor Bowman.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So first I'll start by associating my comments with those of Counselor Lipoff. Absolutely 100% agree with everything he said, and he took my top 3 points. So we'll just go from there. I don't see the MRT doing anything except doing the underlying zoning, and that's a shame because I don't think that helps us meet. I'm not thinking now with an MBTA zoning hat on. I'm thinking with the things that we set forward as far as what we were hoping to get from Village Center zoning, which is the type of zoning that was going to help, provide more people living close to our village centers and in our village centers, providing a variety of housing types that would be appealing to seniors and young families and young single people. And I don't think we're going to be able to solve that. I don't think we're going to get everything we need just by building on top of our existing storefronts on our major streets. But I do think that we need to go a little bit deeper, as has been shown in the layout of the MRT. I think you've picked some good areas. But I do think that we need zoning there that will enable realistically. Yes, I do want to maintain the gorgeous old Victorians and large Tudors, but we also have a variety of, and they're small, not very well-maintained homes that, I would much prefer to see a well-designed triple decker or a fourplex or a fiveplex. And I just don't think we're going to get that with that MRT zoning. So I think we should be, I think, the biggest issue I see there is in the footprint. I just think with 1,500 square feet, as you've shown by your examples there, and I think I look at those buildings and wonder how many of them meet current, would meet current building codes, even for the width of the stairway. Couldn't touch my stairway in my 1888 Victorian, because if I did, I was going to have to change it significantly. And, 18 years ago, that was $100,000 to rebuild that staircase to be compliant. And, and adding out, a couple of feet on the side of my house. And it was just very difficult to think about what could be done there. So, I wonder if, given that, I think we're going to have some issues. I would add the voice too on the VC1 on Route 9. I would think 3- and 4-story buildings along Route 9 would be a much better use of that space, at least 3 stories, and not, I just don't think we're going to get residential at this point along there, and just might provide a little bit better. Lots of other things I could say. I will remind people that e-bikes are outselling EVs. I just spent all of Earth Day talking to people about how to buy an e-bike, and what they how they could use that and how they could bike around the city. So I love the thought of requiring bike parking. But I think more importantly, just maybe think that we need to be committed as a city to providing better bike and pedestrian access as we think about the zoning, to think about that, we can't think about bringing in all of these additional homes and people and not think about how, making sure that we're encouraging and enabling people to get around, not in vehicles. We need to reduce the number of miles traveled by 25%. And it's, yes, co-locating people close to things that they need to be in is really important, but we also have to make sure that they can get around safer. And I do worry, last point I'll make is I do worry a lot about what the lot size is when, what happens when you have that 10 or 11,000 square foot lot, and, would it be, what are we doing to enable 6 units to be on that instead of just 2 big townhomes? So those are my comments. But I do appreciate, and I was happy to see that there is a route to getting to the MBTA zoning and meeting our requirements there. And you guys have a lot of done a lot of hard work, and I appreciate that, and you know, the work going forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Counselor Bowman. I had Counselor Oliver next and then Lucas.
Sure. Thank you, Madam Chair. I heard a couple of minutes ago that, you know, the option that we're looking at here, you know, version 2 of the maps, targeting 10,000 units, enabling 10,000 units. I think that's the right word we want to use, right? Enabling. Did we look at a version that was closer to the 8330? And creating a map around those? If not, I'd like to see one. I'm curious what that would look like. Please. It's my understanding that the 10,000 units does not include several of the village centers. I understand the conversation there. And I do wonder, kind of connected to that, but on a different thread. I believe it was two meetings ago, ZAP committee meetings. Looking around the room, everyone was unanimously in support of the idea of sending a note to the legislature asking for a conversation around the opportunity to include, right, or get credit for, I think might be the right way to phrase it, buildings with commercial on the first floor. I would like to chase that down. I think that is a worthwhile pursuit if we have it.
Representative Vitolo filed an amendment.
Which is probably not good.
That's what he did. He filed the amendment to ask for that.
Oh, he filed a budget amendment, though, which opens up the law. So we're pursuing our own way.
Because I would love to understand that. To more, maybe not here, but like the implications of that. If
Yeah,
possible.
we shouldn't probably talk about that tonight, but we can talk about it again. You'll be seeing a letter soon.
Great. And then the last point I wanted to bring up was just Councilor Laredo, an interesting point. So I just kind of pulled up Google Maps. Near as I can tell, there are 4 public lots within a block behind those storefronts in Brattleboro. Just as I thought it was interesting that there are 4 public lots there. So those are my 2 questions. One, request for map that's closer to the 8330 as opposed to 10,000 units. And then I would really love to understand kind of the process that's behind the notion of getting credit for the buildings, right, that we're currently putting the black markers around on the map.
Right, let me say a couple things, just so everybody can hear it. We did a meeting or 2 ago, talk about our unhappiness about some of the DHCD rules. DHCD was here.
Yes.
DHCD believes that the rules are embedded in the law. There's actually some disagreement about that. And we are, as you put it, chasing it down, but we thought it might be more effective to go through some higher offices to DHCD with some lawyers. But as President Albright said, Representative Vitolo did file a budget amendment. So we don't know what's going to happen in that realm. The other thing is about the number of units. This is our first pass at version 2, giving us a way to meet the current set of rules. And we did spend a lot of time at a previous meeting understanding what we may count and what we may not count. Earlier in this meeting, I know you came over from finance, and thank you for doing that. You know, we talked about the fact that we're doing village center zoning. We started it long before MBTA communities came about. And, you know, we have other reasons why we want to repair the zoning to allow our villages to thrive into the future. Whether you agree with those or not, it was a rather unanimous agreement here. So now it's a matter of, okay, how do we get there? So now we have a version It shows us that we can get to MBTA communities, and there's about 10,000 units that can count in this version. But it makes some big assumptions that we all still have to talk about. For example, the huge one is we're assuming that we're not requiring on-site parking. We understand that on-site parking is going to happen, but if we don't require it, that actually bumps the number of potential units up enormously. It's just a formula. It doesn't mean that's actually what's going to be on the ground, because that might not be practical or reasonable or marketable. So there's those levers. I don't know if you were here for part of that meeting when Mr. Cohen, Will Cohen was here, and he talked about, and then the last meeting, I don't know if you were here, but Jen Kyra talked about the levers we could pull to, and really it's just about the formula to understand what counts and what doesn't count. As she said earlier in the presentation, which you'll have to go back and look at it probably. You know, for example, we thought maybe we would have to increase the threshold for the special permit, you know, go from 30,000 square feet to 40,000 square feet in order to capture more, but that we learned didn't do anything. So we don't have to do that, or didn't do much. It's the parking that actually makes the numbers go up. So there's so many moving parts that I don't think we, you know, we're not like really, maybe Director Heath would speak to this, but to create a version just to hit 83,030 units isn't really what we're about right now. We're trying to figure out, okay, did we get this right? Do we have the right districts proposed for the right places? Does the form of this thing seem to work? If we get some relief from the state or from DHCD, the guess is it won't be in time for us to file our submission. That's a guess from higher up. Maybe we will, but we have to keep proceeding as though we won't.
So it's interesting. Can we refile?
Refile what? Oh, refile our plan?
Yeah.
No, there's a, correct me if I'm wrong, anybody, but there's a hard deadline.
on
And
December
the new
31st.
administration
Yeah.
is not interested in moving it, housing.
Sorry, I wasn't advocating for missing that. I'm literally saying or asking, we file based on the current rules. Rules change. Could we put a new
Maybe.
map up?
Maybe, I don't know.
Yeah, we could, I'm sure we could send an update if we were still meeting compliance just in a different way. I think what you're asking is, could we rezone a number of these properties after this effort back to the existing zoning and then submit that because we get more credit for the mixed use streets?
Maybe as an example, right? I don't know.
It's giving me a headache to think about it.
I want to also focus on, you know, we started this effort as what's best for village centers, what's best for the vitality and long-term health of village centers, and for providing the diversity of housing that's so desperately needed. The number we're getting is an arbitrary number to some degree. It includes a number of assumptions that have to apply to all communities statewide. And that's the number we need to use to show compliance. It's not a build out analysis. So I think our focus should be on what's best for the village centers and how does that get us there along the way to comply with state law, but really about what we want to see in the future for village centers.
Okay, thank you. And I'm Director Heath.
Yeah, just quickly to add tonight, just the thread we're hearing tonight from certain counselors is that the MRT zone, those units are never going to get built because the incentive isn't there. So there's kind of a push-pull here already. Some would say that we're way overestimating the number of units that are going to get built. This is what qualifies for MBTA purposes. There are lots of objectives we're trying to balance here that I think Jennifer pointed out, but the numbers are a mathematical equation that we're trying to.
And we're trying to do it so that we get the best deal for our villages, which it's just a multi-dimensional puzzle. I have two more hands and, okay, yeah, okay. So thank you, Counselor Oliver, Counselor Lucas, and then Norton.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and good evening, everyone, or almost good night. Thank you to the Planning Department for putting the information in the Friday packet. I appreciate it, and I also want to say thank you again for removing the historic districts from the Village Center zoning. I know that was my initial, I think that was my very first comment as it related to Village Center zoning when you met with the Ward 2 councilors back whenever that was. I don't remember the month when you first met with us, but I think that was the very first thing I said, is that the Newtonville Historic District shouldn't be in the Village Center zoning. So I'm glad it's out, really, I am. The other thing that we talked about, and I think it's a good thing we have Councilor Norton and President Albright on the call, was Walnut Street in Newtonville. My memory is that we discussed that potentially it would be VC2 on Walnut Street in Newtonville, not VC3. VC3 is still highly inappropriate for Walnut Street in Newtonville. Walnut Street is not Washington Street. That's my general take. VC3 is, you know, a no-go for me, but I thought we had discussed that, but I'm disappointed it's still VC3 in 2.0. I was wondering if we could talk about the Watertown Street example that you showed, where you had the former two-family house, the one that's under construction, and then you had the four-family house. I actually like the four-family house. That's an example of what could be built in MRT. Is that correct?
Correct. We were using it for illustrative purposes.
Great. Okay. And just wondering, is that lot in the Village Center zoning? It was close. I couldn't tell, but
I'd have to double check.
Doesn't matter. Okay. I was just wondering, but and I know you want to incentivize the MRT and not that two-family that was in the middle that we saw, but if a developer could still very well build that two-family that was shown on display in the middle, correct?
Correct. As Jen Kyra mentioned, you know, solving the issues with the underlying zoning is not the main thing that we can be doing here.
Okay. All right. Yeah. I just wanted, yeah. If you can, I don't know what you can do to incentivize that MRT over the current zoning, but whatever you can come up with in that bag of tricks of yours, maybe not tricks is the best thing to say, but whatever you can come up with will be much appreciated. I think it's quite frankly ridiculous also to require bicycle parking and then not require motor vehicle parking. I agree with Councilor Laredo with what he said previously. It doesn't make any sense, in my opinion, to require bicycle parking. I don't see it, but that's just my opinion. And then, Mr. Mel, you were talking earlier about Auburndale and how the housing units there do not count to the 8,300 or 10,000. And I was just wondering if you could go over again why exactly. You went over it too quick and I didn't understand it.
Sure, happy to do that. So in order for the units, when you look at all the lots and each individual lot, the multifamily housing needs to be allowed by right. In Auburndale, there are numerous lots that are over 30,000 square feet, which in this proposed zoning requires a special permit, so we can't count those. And then we also have the priority streets that require mixed use, which as it stands would also eliminate them from allowing to count for MBTA communities compliance. And so when you remove those lots from the map, there's no contiguous area that is at least 5 acres. And in order to submit for MBTA compliance, the minimum contiguous area of any sub-district is 5 acres.
Okay, did you consider at all adding MRT, either going north, south, east, west from Auburndale? I mean, did you play around with that at all just to see if you could make the math work?
We did not, but happy to work with the Ward 4 counselors and others if that's something that's of interest.
Well, I don't want to speak for the Ward 4 counselors, really. I don't want to. I'm sorry, Councilor Princeman.
Yeah,
but,
we appreciate that. Thank you.
Yes, exactly. I was just wondering why, but I got my answer. So, Councilor Princeman, you have your work cut out for you. And I'm sure Lenny's going to be happy. Why did you not include Woodland and Auburndale? Woodland, I mean, in Boston College in the 2.0 maps? Nothing, not even MRT.
Yeah, I can jump in on this one. So we looked at all of the T stations when we were thinking about how we get to MBTA communities compliance. As you saw, Elliott was the only one we added in. Woodland has large lots near it. One, it doesn't help us with our contiguous area. So it's really hard to connect Woodland to anything else. Or any other village centers. There isn't really good routes to connect Woodland. Anything we add is adding to the total area, therefore increasing the size of that one contiguous district. So if we added Woodland, then potentially a contiguous district gets larger. We were also trying to get as far as we could with the tools we had already developed. Given the tight time frame on this, that it needs to be adopted by the end of the year, and we've already spent 2 years developing this zoning. We wanted to see how far we could get with the zoning we've already been discussing. The lots are too big for the most part. You would have to allow a lot more by right. The larger lots also bring down our density overall because we're looking at the total area and total number of units. So Woodland was challenging to add using our existing tools. It also sort of worked against a number of our goals. Boston College, there could be some good areas for maybe MRT around Boston College. I don't know that we could get to the 5 acres though. So we can't count anything that's owned, that's an educational use. So whatever the university owns, we're not rezoning, we can't count that. There's also some large public city-owned parcels over by Boston College. You're not left with very much in the half-mile radius after you take all of those out. So, you know, it's one, not a village center, so it wasn't part or not something we traditionally think of as a village center. So it wasn't part of the initial effort, and it didn't really do much to help us towards MBTA communities compliance. Chestnut Hill, if you look at the map, almost the entire half-mile radius is in the local historic district. So what's left is really just a portion of the street. That already, again, large parcels already has a number of special permits. So we didn't include that. So that's how we ended up just adding on at Elliott, but not the other T stops.
Okay, yeah, that's helpful. I understood why you couldn't do Chestnut Hill. So I guess it's a combination of, I guess, it's really the large lots, I guess, is the driving factor.
That's part of it. It
okay.
didn't really work towards our goals.
Yeah, okay, all right. Well, oh, sorry, go on.
I just wanted to follow up on the bike parking real quick, since this did come up earlier as well. Bike parking is very different than vehicular parking. It's not controlling the design and the cost of the building. Bike parking is much less expensive, takes up much smaller area. So it's not a driving factor like vehicular parking is in determining the size of the building, how many units you can get, and how expensive it's going to be. Also doesn't require large driveways or large amount of circulation. It's also consistent with our policy goals to reduce the vehicular miles traveled and to promote alternative forms of transportation. So that's why it might seem strange that we're requiring bikes, but not requiring vehicular parking. So that's why.
Yeah, okay. Let's see. All right, that is all I have for now. I guess I'll send in any comments or questions to planning offline, and it is getting a little late for the folks in the room.
Thank you. Thank you. It's helpful for people to send in additional comments because it is after 10 o'clock, but Councillor Norton, you're the last hand up. Sorry, keep you waiting.
No worries, and thank you so much, Madam Chair. I'll be quick. It is late. This is like zap time, Finance Committee. We're never up this late. I was at Finance, so I missed the first part of the meeting. I will watch later. But from what I saw, it's great to see how much work you've done. The Planning Department really is to be commended for this proposal to get us in compliance with the MBTA Communities Act. So really appreciate that. I'm also happy to see more units along the Green Line, where public transportation is arguably easier and more convenient to use. I also am pleased, as Councilor Lucas said, that the historic district in Newtonville was removed. I will reiterate some of the points made by Councilor Wright. I think we should find ways to avoid taller than 5-story buildings, and we should avoid those taller than 4-story buildings in narrow village centers like Newtonville. In my 10 years almost on the council, I've heard consistently that many people can accept more density, but they don't want towering buildings, and that 4 stories seems to be a height that still feels like a village, and beyond that, not so much. I also appreciate very much the thought and care in incentivizing smaller units and disincentivizing tear downs. And I'll look for more feedback from our colleagues and our residents on how they feel about whether this proposal does that. I also do agree, Councilor Wright made a great point about as we're allowing or incentivizing a lot more units, we need to be planning ahead, because if these units get built faster than some people think they will, we're going to have a lot more demand for our schools, our playing fields, which we already don't have enough of, for the pool, the senior center, police and fire, ambulance services, and more. And lastly, I do agree with Councilors Baker and Oliver that I question zoning for more by right units than the state is requiring. As we know, if we approve something that our residents do not like, and if they are mad enough, they can organize to reverse it. And I really do not want to see that happen. So that would be an argument in favor of doing what we are required to do, spread the changes around equitably and sell that to our residents, rather than do something that many of them will find extreme. Thanks.
Thank you, Councilor Norton. So I see 2 hands up at the table. Councilor Wright and then Baker. Or Baker and then Wright, whichever.
Just in anticipation of where we go next time, I guess the question that is a major change here, leaving aside the MBTA, the new MBTA. Sorry, the name of it. Thank you. But is the question of the parking requirement is really a pivotal issue, because it's and I do think that you ought to look carefully at that, because either the private market will provide parking in some way that isn't optimal. I think of Councilor Danberg's discussion about the lot near her, where she has a number of cars that seem to be in lawn, yard cars to become the yard. I would hate for that to be the outcome of this situation, where you go to a lot of trouble to produce something positive, and then it turns into something negative because the market solution is less than optimal. Now, you're trying to avoid taking bigger swaths of the city and zoning, but I do think if there is, let's put it, maneuvering room between the amounts that are available through this and the scenario that you've done now, and what we've been doing in the village centers, to at least understand what we're doing to take the parking out completely, because we were on a track, I thought, before if we hadn't done the MBTA communities, I thought the village centers were going to require at least the provision was 1 unit parking for each unit of the structure. That was sort of the original proposal. That
It was in VC one.
BC one, but at least there's some way of dealing with the parking demand. And I don't think the parking demand is going to go away, and the kind of, well, we all hope that these centers will be vibrant. Restaurants are not enough, people go to the store for other things and they've got to get around and they're travel, you know, they're just, cars are part of the fabric of the city. So I really would like the department to think about both sides of the equation. Should we still require some parking? If it is a matter of positive planning, or if the market decides to provide parking, do we say where it has to go? You know, it doesn't say you have to have it, but do we have to say it has to go behind, or you know, what do we do about that rather than just let it happen? So I think that that's an important dimension of this, because I think we would be unhappy if all of the development occurred. Let's suppose that it produces the result which the state hopes it does, rather than we're just going through a planning exercise. And then, but there's spillover effects in the community that we all find unacceptable, because people are parking in situations. We still have a parking ban, and we still have to deal with how we deal with the cars on the street. So I think that dimension really could require, and I'm clear, but I think we would benefit from some further thought on what we do here, because I think the reduction or the elimination of parking was an economic judgment. Basically, you don't have to zone as much, and I know the trade-offs that Ms. Kyra indicated about if you add more space or more land area, then you have to have 50% of it, and there's kind of a, you know, negative effect of that, and so it looked like a real win to just get rid of the parking requirement. But I'm not sure it's a wise win if it doesn't get us some clarity about how it's going to be handled and how we make it work.
So one thing we could do is review some of the parking location requirements that are, of course, we'll have the text next time. And there were parking location requirements and driveway offsets and, you know, things like how you could access a site, what was allowed, what wasn't allowed, like you couldn't be so close to an intersection, or, you know.
Well, there's certainly design features, but
Right, but I think it's a good idea to review that. I don't, of course, we don't have anything put together for the MRT zone that we know of. Maybe you have some text in there about, in terms of location of parking. If there is to be on-site parking, then where is it? Where may it go?
Well, and then the department has given us some candidate buildings that they think are sort of prototypes that the zoning would produce. It's worth thinking about how they deal with that question there in those contexts. And this is late, and we can't spend a lot of more time on it, but I do think that it's the major shift besides adding territory that this represents, and I think it's one that we really need to understand before we can make the final judgment. At least I would.
Can I just build on that as a request that, could you guys run the numbers for 0.5 parking spaces per unit? Or 1 parking space per unit, and see how the numbers drop? Just so we know the numbers increase.
You're asking for sensitivity to that.
Yeah, if you had 0.5 or 1, where does that take us? Is it back down to, exactly, is it back down to 5,000? Or is it still high enough to pass muster?
Some number.
Yeah.
Work.
My memory is we saw those numbers for version 1 and they dropped precipitously.
Well, I think. Well, we added a lot more. We added a lot more.
Yeah, I understand. So, yeah, okay, thank you. All set?
Yep.
And Councilor Ray.
I'm a night owl. I could stay here for a few hours, but I'll try to keep it a little.
You may, but we're not going to.
You'll be all alone.
So one thing I just to tie up, so the continuous area is 69% and we only need it to be 50. So there's some play in there. And I think to kind of spread it a little bit more, we can include Newton Corner, because we can have 10% outside of a half a mile of the T station. So that's another way to kind of play with it with the numbers. So I'm going to go through a few of my questions. I will send some other ones in. I hope they get answered within a couple of weeks and not a month or two. So first, one of my questions on the charts where you had like the MRT chart version 1 versus version 2. So the setback, the front setbacks is 10 feet or average. So which one is the overlying one? I mean, I would like to see 10 feet or average, whichever is farther away or something like that, or because right now in the zoning, it's 25 feet for a front setback, at least according to your chart a couple pages later.
I'll let, I'll let Jen answer the question about, 10 feet versus average, but what I will say is if you walk around these areas, most lots are not, don't have a 25-foot setback. So whether or not our zoning requires 25 feet, it is not reflective of the existing conditions on the ground. The front setback is typically a bit less.
There are
in these
some
areas.
streets that are far back, but
Yeah, again, typically it's not.
I like to see the average and using that and, instead of the 10 feet. So I don't know why 10 feet or average. Which one wins out? And why is there a choice?
Yeah, so we'll take a closer look at this, and also we can discuss more when we have UTL here next time. But I think our thought was that in general, where we added the average was that you could go less with the average if that's what's existing. So of course, if the houses were set back further, you wouldn't take that average. You would have the 10-foot minimum. We did set it intentionally lower than the existing MR zones because these are the areas right on the edges of the commercial cores of village centers. In most cases, it does make sense for the buildings to come a little closer to the street as you're providing that transition to more of the single family residential neighborhoods further out. Also, as I think Zach may have mentioned this earlier, we are requiring the parking to be within or behind the building. So you are giving a little extra play up front in order to make sure that you're able to provide the parking in the rear, because we don't want to see the parking in front of the building.
But parking's not required though. They don't have to provide parking.
Right, but they likely will provide some.
Yeah, but I believe now we don't allow parking in front of on the driveway of the house.
You are allowed a certain number of spaces within the setback now.
Okay.
There are cases where people certainly go beyond that. I think it's 1 or 2 spaces typically within the front setback, but you are allowed some today.
Okay. If you have a street, and again, there are some streets where all the houses are set back 20 feet. Now all of a sudden you're bringing these new houses 10 feet from the street. It is going to change your streetscape there. And I like to see, what the average is. It should be more of that. But going to the next one, I still have a little bit of problems. And this was in your chart, MRT versus the current zoning. And for 45 feet, which to me, it's 15 feet for the ground floor, 12 feet for the next floor, and 18 for the next one, which seems quite excessive because we have pitched roofs now on many, many houses, and it's maximum 36. So why such a big difference there?
And it's a maximum to provide flexibility, creating opportunities for different building heights, different architectural features. If in the future, over time, someone wanted to come in with you were to say a certain neighborhood retail businesses were appropriate in some of these areas, and you were to change the zoning to allow it, then potentially the first floor heights would already be built in to accommodate those uses. In most cases, we would not expect someone to, again, max out these heights. Please, you can go into 2-family and 3-family homes when it comes to residential buildings. The people aren't going to develop where extra height for not getting more money. So you're typically it's to allow the flexibility. I don't think we're going to see a lot of 45-foot tall, 2.5-story buildings.
Yeah,
Well,
and for the half story for the pitch, we are trying to make sure you can get some livable space underneath of there. So
Correct.
it's not a direct comparison to our single family homes today that might be 2.5 stories, because we're trying to allow for, 4 units in a relatively small building. So we want to make sure there's actually some livable space on that upper story under the pitch.
this is, you're gonna be talking to developers anyway. This is something I think you should talk to them too, about the height, if they would actually build to that height. On another one of your charts, it's remove parcels in local historic districts, and I love that. What about landmark buildings? There's not a lot of them. I mean, but I think they should be removed from the zoning too.
So we didn't remove landmark buildings, as they still are under the discretion of the NHC, and they're held to a very high bar for any changes or any additions. So we left those in the zoning. You are not going to see them torn down, but there may be some opportunities for some landmark buildings where you want to add on to it, and it's done in a historically appropriate way. Also, the zoning provides flexibility for how those buildings get used by not requiring parking every time you have a change of use. So I think there is a benefit for keeping those landmark buildings in the zoning.
Okay, yeah, and I agree with President Albright. That was my question. Is that on your chart here, 1 parking space per unit, we were at 3,500 units in version 1. But it'll be interesting to see what it is in version 2 for 1.5 parking spots. So just 1 or 2 other things, and then I'll send in the rest of my questions. Are easements allowed in the MRT? So if you take a lot, you're going to divide it in half. Can you have an easement to put the driveway between the 2 of them?
Yeah, we don't have anything in the zoning preventing easements. And you do see that condition a good bit today, especially in older homes where you have the shared driveway in the center.
Oh, there will be a special permit in the easement.
It's not in the ordinance, but I don't know. Can you ask for one by special permit? I'm not sure that you can.
An easement? I think that's usually a private deal between the landowners.
Is where the pavement goes in the boundary. I think you're straddling a boundary.
Yeah.
And I think that's you may run into a setback problem just because you're doing that. And you may make a cross easement between the properties, but I'm not sure how that.
But then you might not conform to the side yard setbacks. So.
Yeah, you would still take all setbacks from the property lines, not from any easements.
Yeah. Okay. And just 2 more quick ones. So since you're talking to some developers and builders, right now, a lot of our units in the city averages around 1,000 square feet, because in our zoning, we require for 1,000 square feet per unit for the lot. We're taking that away. So ask the developers, if that goes away, are most of their units going to be 700 square feet or 800 square feet? Right now it's around 1,000 because that's what they're limited to, but would they go smaller? And if that's the case, that means also it's more numbers than what's up there. And
that's all right. Could you explain?
So right now,
we're not requiring 1,000 square foot units.
No, but the count here, the count that we came up with, the 10,000 square feet, is assuming in that,
it assumes 1,000 square feet, but not that the unit is 1,000 square feet.
Correct.
It's just simply a dividing, it's just.
Right. That includes circulation and common spaces.
So it would be interesting, you're talking to developers now. So another question to ask is, if there's no constraints on how small you make the units, what would you typically build? Would you typically build 700 square foot units? Or, because right now it's an average around 1,000, just because the land it is that we have. So it'll just be an interesting thing. You're talking to them anyways. That's just one more question. And
it really depends on what year it is and what the market wants,
where it's located and the size of the building and yeah, I think there's a lot of factors.
And so I did a quick, while we're here, just a quick analysis in the different village centers that were excluded in the 5 village centers that were excluded in the calculation. So Newton Center had 6 lots, which were over 30,000 square feet. They went up to 97,000 square feet. Newtonville had 5 lots up to 90,000. West Newton had 4 lots up to 79. Woburn had 3 lots. Highlands had 3 and Route 9 had 3. So just wanted to put that out there. And then my rest of my questions I will send into planning. Thank
Okay,
you.
because the rest of that, I'm
Yeah.
done.
Can you send that to us too, because I didn't catch what all that list.
Oh, so
Why don't you send it in through Jacqueline?
okay, but Counselor Laredo asked how many lots were excluded in these calculations.
okay.
So I looked into the different villages, over 30,000 square feet lots are excluded. So these I counted, you know, quickly in what the biggest one was in each of those villages.
Good. So we're gonna see that next time is my understanding. We're gonna be able to see, literally see the lots on a map and account of what's getting excluded from the MBTA communities count.
What is the next?
May 8th. And it's the whole meeting. We don't have anything else unless something comes up. We have nothing else on the agenda. So, wow, thank you, everybody, and thank you, planning staff. Please, Council Cressman, do I have a motion?
I move hold.
Thank you. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Sir. Wanting to stay the rest of the night? No, thank you. Thank you, everyone. Good night.
Just ask you a It's late for me, so if you can do it in 2 minutes, that would be great. I'll do, that's okay. What's your name? Your maps show your